Chapter 21. Little girl, are you okay? The young man saw her pale face and seemed scared. He said, the path of cultivation has always been bloody. This kind of villain can't be left alive. You need to get used to it. Tinga regained her composure and tried to calm herself down. This senior was right. This kind of person wouldn't even know how to scheme against others. Besides, he wanted to harm her, so she didn't mind killing him. She looked up at the young man and asked, Senior, are you my father's friend? The young man smiled, bent down and said to her, My martial uncle is your father's friend. He was entrusted by your father to send me to pick you up. This person is really related to my father. Does that mean I can leave here and live with my father? Thinking of this, she was very happy. Senior, will you take me to my father's place? Will I be able to see my father? The young man was stunned. This child obviously missed her father very much. How could he tell her about his death? After thinking for a while, he finally said, Little girl, your father has already passed away. He couldn't let go of you and your mother before he died, so he entrusted this matter to my martial uncle. Seeing that the little girl's cheerful expression suddenly froze, he couldn't bear it and comforted her. Don't be sad. You still have an uncle. He didn't finish his words. The little girl grabbed his sleeve and suddenly burst into tears. He was flustered. Little girl, don't cry. He really wasn't good at coaxing children. He couldn't help but feel regretful. If he knew this would happen, he would have said it later. But now, he had no choice but to let her cry to her heart's content. He shifted his gaze to the side. The mortal coachman was shivering in fear and looked at him with a frown. He said, You can go. We don't hurt mortals. The coachman was relieved to hear this. He thanked him profusely and hurriedly drove the carriage away. Watching the carriage go away, the young man lowered his head. The child had stopped crying and was now sobbing. Although he didn't know how to coax children, he pitied her for losing her parents at such a young age. So he said gently, Don't be sad. I'll take you to Kunwu to see your uncle, okay? Tinga raised her tear-stained face. Senior, I never knew what my father looked like. I cultivated diligently just to find my father, but the young man patted her head. We are cultivators. We have to see through life and death. Your father has passed away. He wanted you to be well. Don't let him down. Tinga shook her head, then nodded. Seeing that she finally stopped crying, the young man smiled. Then I'll take you away now, okay? Tinga hesitated. You won't come back anymore? Looking at her expression, the young man thought that she was reluctant to part with him. Well, even if this little girl was already a cultivator, she was still a child after all. She had lived in the secular world since childhood, so perhaps she was reluctant to part with her family in the secular world. Since I've already stepped onto the immortal Tao, it's best that I abandon my mortal bonds. Little girl, if you are unwilling to leave, it will be very difficult for you to take another step forward in your cultivation in this mortal world. Tinga shook her head. I don't want to stay here. Aside from Tianxiao, none of them like me. Oh, the young man didn't expect that although this child looked very obedient, she was unexpectedly not lovable. Then why do you still want to come back? Tinga said, Tianxiao is very good to me. I want to see her again in the future. The young man smiled. So that's how it is. That's easy. When you build your foundation, you'll be able to fly. At that time, you can come back whenever you want. Fly? Fly in the sky like him? Tinga's eyes lit up. Really? The young man nodded with a smile, then said, I'll take you with me. In a few days, we'll reach Kunwu. Tinga nodded, then shook her head. Senior, can I go home and take a look before we leave? Of course you can. The young man waved his hand, and the sword on his back flew out automatically. He held Tinga's hand and stepped on the flying sword. I'll take you home first. With a whoosh, the scenery in front of her suddenly changed. Tinga was startled. Soon after, she saw that she was in midair. Her surroundings were pitch black, and she could vaguely see mountains and rivers below. She suddenly felt weak under her feet. Seeing her like this, the young man laughed. Don't be afraid. With me here, you won't fall. Tinga's face was pale. She was scared witless, but when she heard his comforting words, she nodded reluctantly. The The young man slowly talked to her to distract her. Little girl, your surname is M.O. What's your first name? M.O. Tinga stared down without blinking and answered, My name is Chinga, Tion as in heaven, and G as in song. M.O. Tinga, the young man repeated her name and said with a smile, This name is good. My surname is the same as your father's, and my name is Jinwen. You don't need to call me senior. Just call me Big Brother Yi. He then asked, How did you cultivate? Is it the cultivation technique your father left behind? M.O. Tinga hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I found it by accident. You might know a person's face, but not his heart. After the incident with Li Yushan, she became even more careful. Yi Jingwen's gaze fell on her hand. After staring at it for a long time, he said, The bead in your hand isn't an ordinary object. It contains spiritual aura. It's a treasure, right? M.O. Tinga was startled. Sure enough, he was in the foundation building realm. Although Li Yushan also saw it, he didn't doubt it at all. However, this big brother Yi unexpectedly saw through it at a glance. Seeing her frightened expression, Yi Jinwen smiled. Don't worry. If I wasn't trustworthy, Martial Uncle wouldn't have sent me here. I just found out you really inherited your mother's pure Yin constitution. If I had bad intentions, I would have directly taken you away. M.O. Tinga finally felt a bit relieved after hearing what he said. She said embarrassedly, Senior, oh, Big Brother Yi, this bead was left by my father to my mother. I also don't know what it is. I only know it can gather spiritual aura. Oh, Yi Jingwen took a second look at it then asked, Can I take a look at it? M.O. Tinga thought for a moment, then took off the bead and handed it to him. Yi Jingwen took it, turned it over and over again, then sent a strand of his divine sense into it. In the end, he returned it to her hand and said with a smile, If I'm not mistaken, this is a string of spirit-gathering beads. There's a spirit-gathering formation engraved inside it. It's indeed a treasure for low-level cultivators, but it's useless for high-level cultivators. Presumably, your father left it with your mother in the hope that she wouldn't suffer any disasters or illnesses and could prolong her life. Unfortunately, M.O. Tinga silently put the bead away. She knew her mother's illness couldn't be cured. It could only prolong her life. She raised her head and looked at Yi Jingwen. She thought for a moment, then asked, Big Brother Yi, is my father really an immortal? What about you guys? Of course. Your father is a core formation cultivator, a famous cultivator in West Kunwu. Seeing that M.O. Tinga's eyes lit up, he smiled and said, As for me, I'm a disciple of Xianqing School. My martial uncle is Master Daoist Shoujing, an elder of Xianqing School. My martial uncle is amazing. He's a rare genius who formed his gold core in 100 years in the Celestial Pole. Your father and my martial uncle are friends, so of course he's also amazing. M.O. Tinga was a bit confused. Big Brother Yi, since my father's so amazing, why would he? Yi Jingwen couldn't answer this question. He just sighed and said, The path of cultivation is really difficult and dangerous. Not only is the human heart unpredictable, but for natural treasures and fated chances, you also have to fight against the heavens. Even heaven-gifted geniuses can't guarantee they'll live forever. Seeing that M.O. Tinga didn't understand, he couldn't help but laugh at himself. How could a child who hadn't experienced these things understand? As they talked, they finally arrived at Mo's village. Chapter 22. In a small town at the foot of western Kunwa Mountain, a blue light flashed across the sky. A young man descended with a girl. They were Yi Jingwen and M.O. Tinga. 2 days ago, the two of them returned to the M.O. family's village. Yi Jingwen said he wanted to take M.O. Tinga away, and no one in the M.O. family dared to object. Soon after, M.O. Tinga packed her things and bid farewell to Tian Xiao. After learning all of this, Tian Xiao was both envious and reluctant. Unfortunately, Yi Jingwen said she didn't have spiritual roots and couldn't cultivate. The two children could only tearfully part ways. In the past 2 days, M.O. Tinga learned many things from Yi Jingwen. It turned out that her father had left 10 years ago in order to search for opportunities in a secret place. To the east of the Celestial Pole, there was a mountain range that was the territory of the demonic path. It was said that 100,000 years ago, the righteous path and the demonic path fought a great war, and the demonic path was defeated, so they gave up Kunlun Mountain. The righteous path and devil path were separated by a mountain. To the northeast of the mountain was the devil path, and to the southwest was the leader of the righteous path, Tiandao sect. This mountain was named Demonic Mountain. It was said that Demonic Mountain was the battlefield of the great war of immortals and devils in ancient times. To this day, extremely powerful restrictions, formations, and other things were left behind. Ordinary cultivators would die as soon as they entered, but there were also many treasures left behind, so people often went there to look for fated chances. 10 years ago, the restrictions on a certain part of Demonic Mountain disappeared, and both the righteous and devil path rushed in. Mo Tinga's father, Yi Hai, left the Mo clan to go there. Unfortunately, not long after, only a small portion of the cultivators who entered this place managed to escape. It was said that the rest had all perished. Xianqing School's master Taoist, Shoujing, met Yi Hai on this trip, and the two of them went missing together on this mountain. Originally, many people thought that Taoist master Shoujing had unfortunately fallen. Unexpectedly, he returned safely not long ago. However, all the cultivators who went missing with him died. He also used a secret technique and almost lost all of his power to escape. As soon as he returned to Xianqing School, Master Taoist Shoujing lost a lot of his cultivation, so he had no choice but to immediately enter closed-door meditation. It was said that he owed Yi Hai a great favor for being able to escape this time, so he sent Yi Jingwen to make arrangements for his funeral. From Yi Jingwen, Mo Tinga learned that there was still a bloodline on her father's side. Yi clan was originally a cultivation clan from Mount Qingming in western Kunwu. However, their population was sparse, and in the end, only 2 brothers were left. In the past, when Yi Hai was still alive, he had an awe-inspiring reputation, so no one dared to bully him. However, 10 years ago, the news of Demonic Mountain's disappearance spread. Yi clan lost its only core formation cultivator and couldn't gain a foothold in Mount Qingming. The last cultivator had no choice but to move his clan to the secular world and become an individual cultivator. This cultivator was Yi Hai's younger brother, Mo Tinga's uncle. When you find your uncle, you'll follow me back to Mount Taikong. You can either join Xianqing School or rebuild your clan. Yi Jingwen told her that Xianqing School was one of the 7 great cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole. With Xianqing School as their backing, they weren't afraid of being bullied. There were 7 great cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole. Among them, Tiandao sect was the most powerful, and Xianqing School was second only to it. Tiandao sect could be said to be the #1 cultivation group in West Kunwu. Mo Tinga didn't have any objections. She had waited for so long to find out that her father was no longer around. Now, as long as she could leave that house, she did not care where she went. If there was anything to look forward to, it would be having an uncle. They set out from the Mo family's village for 2 days and finally arrived here. Yi Jingwen had said that there were immortal cultivators here. Mo Tinga looked around curiously, but she discovered that this was just an ordinary town. Yi Jingwen saw her disappointed expression and said with a smile, "These are just mortals. How can mortals see the residence of immortals?" He then led her into a dilapidated, small temple. Mo Tinga also didn't find anything unusual about this small temple. Yi Jingwen took out a jade pendant from his robe and handed it to Mo Tinga. "This is a gift from my martial uncle. In the future, don't let this thing leave your body. If you carry it with you, even nascent soul seniors won't be able to see through your constitution." Mo Tinga took it. The jade pendant was round and had a warm jade color. It was painted with cloud patterns and tied with a red string. She turned it over and found a small Qin character was carved in the middle of the other side. Yi Jingwen said, "My martial uncle's surname is Qin. People call him Qin Shoujing." He waved his hand, and the scene in front of them suddenly changed. The statue of a god that had fallen to the ground in the temple disappeared and was replaced by a street. Yi Jingwen pulled her hand. "Let's go." This looked like an ordinary street in a small town. It didn't look like a place where immortals lived at all. Yi Jingwen smiled when he heard what Imo Tinga said. The so-called immortals are just people who haven't become immortals yet. These markets in the secular world are places where individual cultivators gather. Generally, they don't have any powerful forces, so of course, they don't have any style to speak of. As soon as the two of them entered the market, they attracted people's attention. It was because of Yi Jingwen's momentum and the clothes he was wearing. A foundation-building expert wearing Xianxing School's Taoist robe was really enviable. Along the way, Imo Tienga found that this place was different from the secular world. For example, the people who set up stalls on the streets would sell all sorts of strange things. Some people would only hang out a sign saying what they were selling. There were also people who would lead birds and beasts that had never been seen in the secular world. However, there weren't many of them. Yi Jingwen led her through the streets and alleys without looking sideways until they finally entered a shop. This shop was huge. She didn't know what they were selling. She only saw a tall counter, but nothing else. As soon as she entered the shop, Imo Tinga saw that the shop assistant who guarded the counter was wearing clothes similar to Yi Jingwen's. He also wore a blue robe and a white coat, but his clothes weren't as exquisite as Yi Jingwen's. Imo Tinga could also sense that his cultivation level wasn't much higher than hers. As soon as they came in, the counter assistant took a careful look at them and came out to salute Yi Jingwen, calling him martial uncle. Yi Jingwen nodded and asked, "Where's the shopkeeper?" This shop assistant was obviously also a disciple of Xianxing School. He hurriedly invited them in and said, "Martial Uncle Chun is upstairs. Martial Uncle, this way please." When they went upstairs, Imo Tinga saw that the second floor was the same as the first floor. It was full of counters, but there were many chairs on the side, which seemed to be a place to receive guests. The shop assistant led them to a corner where an old man in his 50s or 60s stood. He respectfully reported, "Martial Uncle Chun, a martial uncle from our school has arrived." The old man seemed to be dozing off. When he opened his eyes and saw Yi Jingwen, he became spirited and ordered the shop assistant, "Go and serve tea." "Yes," the shop assistant answered and retreated. Seeing that Yi Jingwen was wearing their school's high-level disciple uniform and was so young, the old man didn't dare to neglect him. He stood up, cupped his hands, and said, "Junior martial brother, I'm the shopkeeper here. My surname is Chun, and my name is Yoli. May I ask which master Taoist you belong to, and why did you come here?" Yi Jingwen returned the greeting and said, "I'm Yi Jingwen of Clear Spring Peak. I came here on Martial Uncle Shoujing's order to inquire about a certain person." Oh! Upon hearing the three words Clear Spring Peak, the old man didn't dare to neglect him even more. Clear Spring Peak was the cultivation place of Patriarch Jinghe. This patriarch's temper had always been bad, and he was very protective. "Junior martial brother Yi, do you have an identity tablet?" Yi Jingwen nodded, then took out a palm-sized jade tablet from his robe and handed it over. After the old man verified that there was no mistake, he returned the identity tablet to Yi Jingwen and invited the two of them into a private room covered with restrictions. "Junior martial brother Yi, please speak." Yi Jingwen admired Chun Yoli's cautious manner, so his tone became a lot more amiable. "Senior martial brother Chun, the person we're looking for is an individual cultivator named Yi Jiang. His cultivation level is in the foundation building realm, and he's quite old. His appearance should be around 50 years old. Reportedly, someone saw him passing through this place." Chun Yuli stroked his beard and pondered for a moment before he said, "Junior martial brother, please wait here for a moment. I'll send a disciple to inquire about him." Yi Jingwen nodded. "Senior martial brother, please." Chun Yuli withdrew and once again ordered someone to bring tea. Mo Tienga was very surprised to see that this tea actually contained spiritual aura. Yi Jingwen said to her, "This is just a tea plant cultivated in a place with spiritual aura. It's not a rare species." "Oh," Mo Tienga said, then asked, "Big brother Yi, is this a shop run by your school?" Yi Jingwen answered, "Yes. We have shops in every market square. If disciples outside need help, they can look for the shopkeeper." Oh, the two of them waited for a while before Chun Yuli came in. Chapter 23. Qin Yuli came in and said to Yi Jingwen, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, is the person you mentioned a cultivator from Mount Qingming's Yi family? Yi Jingwen nodded. Yes. Senior Marshal Brother Chen. Have you heard about him? Qin Yuli smiled. Yes, he bought something from our shop not long ago. Oh. Yi Jingwen was pleasantly surprised. When did that happen? Where did he go? Qin Yuli said, about a month ago. He came to our shop with a friend. From their conversation, one of them was a cultivator from Mount Qingming's Yi family, and the other was also from Cultivation family. His surname was Lu. They seemed to be close friends, and the cultivator surnamed Lu came to see Yi Jiang off. As for where he went after that, we don't know. Yi Jingwen thought for a moment and understood what happened. When Marshal Uncle Shoujing asked his disciples to gather information, he learned that Yi Hai went missing on Demonic Mountain. A few years later, other cultivation families from Mount Qingming came to bully them and wanted to drive them out of Mount Qingming's spirit veins. The only cultivator left in the Yi clan was Yi Hai's younger brother, Yi Jiang. This Yi Jiang was not as talented as Yi Hai and could only barely cultivate to the foundation-building realm. How could a foundation-building cultivator fight against those clans that had core formation cultivators? Yi Jiang had no choice but to send all the mortals in his family to the secular world, separating them from the cultivation world and letting them enjoy glory and wealth in the secular world, while he himself became an individual cultivator. He was already old, so he no longer thought about advancing and only traveled around. The last time he was seen was near Mount Qingming. Qin Yuli saw him thinking, so he suggested another idea. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, they're very familiar with each other. As far as I know, there's also a cultivation family surnamed Lu in Mount Qingming. That cultivator surnamed Lu might be from that family. How about you go to the Lu family and ask? Yi Jingwen didn't have any other way, so he thought this idea was feasible. He said, Thank you for your advice, Senior Marshal Brother Chen. May I ask where the Lu family is? What does that cultivator surnamed Lu look like? What's his cultivation level like? Qin Yuli stroked his beard. The Lu family is located on the west side of Mount Qingming. Junior Marshal Brother, if you see a mountain shaped like a palm, that cultivator surnamed Lu will be there. According to the disciple who received him, that cultivator surnamed Lu is also in the foundation-building realm like Yi Jiang. They look about the same age, and it seems he also doesn't have long to live. Yi Jingwen nodded and stood up. Thank you, Senior Brother Chen. I'll leave now. Goodbye. I wouldn't dare. Qin Yuli shook his head repeatedly. Since we're from the same sect, this is what I should do. Junior brother, have a safe journey. Yi Jingwen cupped his hands to bid farewell. He then led Imo Tinga out of the market square, got on his flying sword, and continued on their journey. Big brother Yi, are we going to Mount Qingming? Yeah. Go find someone to ask about your uncle. You'll be able to find him soon. Imo Tinga hesitated for a moment before she raised her head and asked, Big brother Yi, why must my uncle leave Mount Qingming? Is it because he can't beat others? Before answering, Yi Jingwen hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he told the truth. You should know that the cultivation world is a world where strength is respected. Spirit veins, cultivation techniques, and natural treasures are all obtained by those who are capable. The spirit vein of Mount Qingming is quite good, so it was divided among the cultivation clans. If you don't have the corresponding ability, you won't be able to enjoy this benefit. Just like Liu Shan, she muttered to herself, because he's stronger than me, I can only listen to him. If I'm stronger than him, I can make him listen to me or even kill him. Yi Jingwen didn't answer for a long time. He remembered when he entered the school when he was a child. Because he didn't have a backer, he was always bullied by high-level disciples. Later, he cultivated diligently every day and finally shone brilliantly in the school's minor competition. From then on, he became Master Taoist Qing Yuan's disciple. From then on, he was a cut above the others. Those who bullied him in the past sent him gifts to apologize and change their arrogance. He also remembered this little girl's background. Both her parents were dead, and there was no one who loved her in that family in the secular world. Moreover, she had a pure Yin constitution. It could be imagined that if people found out about this, she wouldn't be able to live a peaceful life. he sighed and said, "Yes, only when you're strong enough can you control your own fate. Otherwise, it'll be decided by others." Tinga nodded calmly. "I understand." At this moment, a tall mountain appeared under their feet. This mountain was more than 1,000 feet high and had several peaks that pierced the clouds. It was surrounded by spiritual aura, a sea of clouds, and a lush green mountain. It seemed to live up to its name as a celestial mountain. Yi Jingwen circled the mountain on his sword. Sure enough, he saw a mountain on the west side that looked like a giant palm. The top of the mountain was like 5 fingers, and there was a pavilion in the center of the palm. He took a look and flew towards that place. As soon as the two of them landed, they saw an aura refining cultivator coming to greet them. "Greetings, senior," Yi Jingwen uttered and then asked, "Are you from Liu clan?" This cultivator was only in the second layer of the aura refining realm, but he seemed to be about 50 years old. Apparently, his aptitude was poor and he had no hope of advancing, so he was specially here to welcome guests. Although this cultivator's cultivation level was low, he was very discerning. When he saw Yi Jingwen's clothes were embroidered with taiji clouds, he immediately recognized him as a disciple of Xianqing School. Moreover, he was already in the foundation building realm at such a young age, so he must be an elite disciple. Thus, he was very polite. "Yes, may I know senior's distinguished name and why you've come to visit Liu clan?" Yi Jingwen said, "I'm Yi Jingwen, a disciple of Xianqing School. I came here to look for someone." "Oh," the old man asked enthusiastically, "may I know who senior is looking for? As long as I know him, I'll definitely tell you everything I know." Yi Jingwen also bluntly said, "The person I'm looking for should also be a cultivator of your Liu clan. His cultivation level is in the foundation building realm, and his appearance and age are about the same as yours. Do you have a name?" "I don't." This. An awkward expression appeared on the old man's face. "To be honest, although Liu clan isn't a big clan, we still have about 10 foundation building cultivators, and there are also 6 or 7 people who match your age. May I know why senior is here?" He didn't have a name, so he obviously wasn't an acquaintance. Moreover, he only had an approximate age. The old man looked at Yi Jingwen with a bit of vigilance. He was obviously worried that Yi Jingwen had come to seek revenge. How could Yi Jingwen not know? He immediately took out a jade bottle from his robe and said, "I'm looking for someone because I want to ask him about another person. If you can find that person, here are 10 nourishing pills as a reward." Looking at the jade bottle, the old man couldn't help but feel a bit envious. Although aura-nourishing pills were the most common medicinal pills for aura-refining cultivators, it wasn't easy for a small cultivator like him to obtain them. Moreover, there were 10 of them, and Liu clan was only allocated 1 every month. He immediately smiled and said, "Senior, please come in and take a seat." Yi Jingwen showed a faint smile. He led Tinga into the guest room, where spiritual tea was immediately served. "May I know where senior heard about this person? I'll analyze it with you. Maybe I can figure it out." Yi Jingwen said, "About a month ago, this person and a friend came to the market square at the foot of the mountain in Xianqing School shop." "Oh." The old man thought for a while, then said, "Apart from a foundation building seniors of my Liu clan who are cultivating in closed-door meditation and not at home, I think I know who they are." Upon seeing his gaze, Yi Jingwen threw the jade bottle in his hand. "That being the case, I'll have to trouble you to introduce me." The old man was overjoyed when he caught the bottle and said, "Senior, please wait here for a moment. I'll be back soon." Chapter 24. Before long, the old man led a horse-faced, long-bearded man into the room. Out of curiosity, Tinga looked up and saw that the man was in his 50s. His aura was as strong as Yi Jingwen's. He was a foundation-building cultivator. As soon as the man came in, Yi Jingwen stood up, and Tinga also got down from her chair. The man glanced at Yi Jingwen, seeing the Tai Chi symbol embroidered on the right chest of his robe and the auspicious clouds on his sleeves. He knew Yi Jingwen was an elite disciple of Xianqing School. He didn't dare to be disrespectful and cupped his hands. "I'm Lu Shishan. How should I address you, fellow Taoist. Yi Jingwen also returned the greeting. I'm Yi Jingwen from Xianxing School. I took the liberty to visit you because I have something to ask. Please forgive me, fellow Taoist Lu. Polite people were always popular. Not to mention Yi Jingwen was a disciple of a famous school. Lu Shishan had a good impression of him, so he said with a smile, so it's fellow Taoist Yi. Please sit. Yi Jingwen sat in the guest seat. The old man who welcomed the guests ordered someone to bring them new tea before he left. Lu Shishan took a sip of tea. His gaze fell on Mo Tienga, who was sitting obediently on the side. He stroked his beard and said, "Is this little fellow Taoist Ye's nephew? At such a young age, your cultivation level is already in the second layer. You're a promising talent." Yi Jingwen smiled. Fellow Taoist Lu, you flatter me. In the secular world, reaching the second layer at the age of 10 was a rare talent. In cultivation clans, he could be considered a promising talent, but in a large cultivation group like theirs, he was barely passable. There were many high-level cultivators in their cultivation group. Their descendants had outstanding talents, and they were taught by famous teachers since they were young. They didn't lack medicinal pills, so it wouldn't be difficult for them to reach the third or fourth layer at this age. If they worked hard, it wouldn't be difficult for them to reach the fifth or sixth layer. This kind of disciple usually reached the foundation-building realm at the age of 30. For example, Lu Shishan, who was talented and very hardworking, reached the foundation-building realm at the age of 24. Martial Uncle Shoujing was even earlier, reaching the foundation-building realm at the age of 20. However, the earliest foundation-building cultivator in Xianxing School wasn't Martial Uncle Shoujing, but Martial Uncle Lingxi of Sweet Dew Peak, who succeeded at the age of 17. Lu Shishan wasn't envious. Although their cultivation clan couldn't compare to a sect, it wasn't to the extent of being so narrow-minded. He was just praising them on the surface. Fellow Taoist Lu. After drinking his tea, Yi Jingwen went straight to the point. I took the liberty of coming here to inquire about a fellow Taoist. Oh. Lu Shishan had already heard the report from the old man in charge of welcoming the guests. However, he still showed a look of surprise on his face. After all, he did not know the purpose of the other party asking for this information. A month ago, did fellow Taoist Lu come to Xianxing School shop at the foot of the mountain with a fellow foundation-building cultivator? Lu Shishan nodded. Yes. Is fellow Taoist Yi looking for that friend of mine? Exactly. Yi Jingwen said, Fellow Taoist Lu, is that friend of yours called Yi Jiang? So he's a cultivator from Yi clan of Mount Qingming? Lu Shishan had doubts in his heart, but he still nodded. Fellow Taoist Yi is right. He suddenly remembered that this person was also surnamed Yi, so he couldn't help but hesitate for a moment. Could it be that you are? Yi Jingwen was also a smart person. How could he not know what Lu Shishan was thinking? He immediately said, I've never met this fellow Taoist Yi Jiang, but my martial uncle and fellow Taoist Yi Jiang's elder brother are close friends. Lu Shishan was relieved to hear that. Although he was Yi Jiang's good friend, Yi clan being forced to leave Mount Qingming was the joint effort of many cultivation clans in Mount Qingming, including their Lu clan. However, this kind of matter was decided by the core formation cultivators above them. So it was not his turn to speak, so his friendship with Yi Jiang was still there. If an old friend of Yi clan came looking for them, he would still be a bit worried. After all, Xianxing School was the #1 cultivation group in West Kunwu. Cultivation clans like theirs couldn't afford to offend it. I see. Back then, Senior Yi Hai was indeed a heaven-gifted genius. Yi clan managed to survive for 200 years because of this cultivator. If it weren't for that, the latter part of his words was really inappropriate to say in front of outsiders, so he changed the subject. Fellow Taoist Yi, may I know who your martial uncle is? What advice do you have for me? Yi Jingwen smiled and said, The martial uncle I'm talking about is Master Taoist Shoujing. I don't dare to give advice, but martial uncle was entrusted by an old friend to settle down the descendants of Yi clan. Master Taoist Shoujing? Lu Shishan was shocked. Even Mo Tienga could see the solemn expression on his face. She was puzzled. What happened to Master Taoist Shoujing? How could she know that Master Taoist Shojing could be said to be very famous in West Kunwu? Lu Shishan was already more than 200 years old. He was someone from the same generation as her father, Yihai. However, Yihai had already advanced into the core formation realm when he was more than 100 years old, so he wasn't inferior to the elite disciples of big cultivation groups. On the other hand, their peers in Mount Qingming had always been stuck in the foundation-building realm and hadn't had any fated chances to advance. However, compared to Master Taoist Shojing, they were nothing. Master Taoist Shojing was the descendant of a nascent soul cultivator in Xianqing School. He was brought to Mount Taikong when he was a child. He built his foundation at the age of 20 and formed his gold core at the age of 78. Reportedly, this Master Taoist Shojing wasn't a genius with single or mutated spiritual roots. He only had double spiritual roots. Many cultivators like them who were still struggling in the foundation-building realm also had double spiritual roots. However, in terms of cultivation level, there was a world of difference between them and Master Taoist Shojing. In an entire celestial pole, there were only 2 or 3 people who could form their gold core at the age of 78. This kind of fated chance couldn't be obtained with the help of a nascent soul cultivator. In terms of age, Lu Shishan was already more than 200 years old. He himself built his foundation at the age of 40. When he was already a foundation-building cultivator, Master Taoist Shojing had only just started cultivating. Now, he was still a foundation-building cultivator, while Master Taoist Shojing was already a core formation senior. Right now, Master Taoist Shojing was only about 130 years old. With his cultivation speed, it was very likely that he could form his nascent soul within 100 years. Lu Shishan himself was also a cultivator with double spiritual roots, but his fated chances were always lacking. Every time he thought about Master Taoist Shojing, who had the same aptitude as him, or even Yihai, he could only sigh helplessly. So it's Master Taoist Shojing. A look of respect appeared on Lu Shishan's face. Fellow Taoist Yi, please speak. If I know, I'll definitely tell you everything I know. Seeing that the title of martial uncle was really useful, Yi Jingwen bluntly asked, "May I know where fellow Taoist Yi Jiang went and what his plans are?" Did he tell fellow Taoist Lu? Lu Shishan said, Yi Jiang already moved all the other members of the Yi clan to the secular world. He only came back to take the last collection of the Yi clan. He said it was difficult to make a realm breakthrough, so he planned to travel around and spend the rest of his life in ease. After we parted ways, he wanted to head east. Yi Jingwen nodded. Thank you, fellow Taoist Lu. Do you have a specific purpose? He's probably in the area around Mount Dongming. To the left and right of Mount Qingming were Mount Dongming and Mount Qiming. The spirit vein was second. There weren't any cultivation groups there, but there were some cultivation clans who opened up that area and either sold or rented it to individual cultivators. Over time, it became an extremely lively market square. Many cultivators went there to trade and exchange goods, and there were even core formation individual cultivators occasionally. Lu Shishan took something out of his robe and gave it to Yi Jingwen. Before I parted with Yi Jiang, he gave me a sound-transmitting jade talisman. If I'm not too far away, I can use this to send a message to him. Yi Jingwen took the talisman with a happy expression. Thank you. Fellow Taoist, Lu helped me a lot. I don't know how I can properly thank you. With this talisman, it would be much easier to find someone in a crowd. Yi Jiang left a wisp of his divine sense on it, so it could directly sense his position. Lu Shishan smiled and said, I don't dare to say thank you. Just consider it as making friends with fellow Taoist Yi. Upon hearing what he said, Yi Jingwen's evaluation of Lu Shishan increased by a notch. Thinking about it, it was reasonable. Rather than receiving a gift from him today, it would be better to make friends with him. A Xianqing school disciple might be helpful to him in the future. In that case, I'll take my leave first. Fellow Taoist Lu, we'll meet again if fate wills it. Chapter 25. Yi Jingwen took Mo Tiange and flew towards Mount Dongming. After running around with Yi Jingwen these past few days, Mo Tiange had already adapted to the feeling of flying in the sky. Now that she was no longer afraid, She became more and more fond of flying in the sky and gradually felt the carefree feeling of cultivating. How could mortals not be envious of immortals? It was just that she had been troubled by her past in the past, and she was young and naive, so she had never thought about it carefully. Now that she learned of her father's death, she left the home she lived in, and she had seen many methods with Yi Jingwen. She was truly interested in cultivating. Yi Jingwen saw that she wasn't playful like other children and had a calm temperament, so he gave her some pointers. Tinga benefited a lot. For example, on the first day, she cultivated beside him. Yi Jingwen corrected her posture when she meditated. She didn't have a teacher by her side when she started cultivating, so she had to rely on her instincts to meditate, so her posture couldn't be considered proper. Soon after, Yi Jingwen corrected some of the small problems she had with her cultivation. Once he explained some things to her, Tinga immediately felt a lot clearer. At the same time, she also felt that having a teacher by her side was indeed much better than fumbling around on her own. If she had to fumble around on her own about the things Yi Jingwen told her, it might take her a month or two to understand them thoroughly. In fact, aura refining disciples and cultivation groups were usually taught by high-level aura refining disciples or foundation building disciples. Yi Jingwen often preached to low-level disciples in Xianxing school, so he saw a lot of stupid people with spiritual roots. Seeing that Tinga could understand everything with just a few pointers, he finally realized that being a teacher could also be relaxed. He couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Sure enough, in addition to aptitude, perception was also very important. No wonder Martial Uncle Xianin always said Martial Uncle Shoujing had an excellent perception, so her achievements were higher than his even though her spiritual roots were inferior. Apart from her spiritual roots, she had other talents. In just a few days, the two of them arrived at Mount Dongming. This trip greatly broadened Tinga's horizons. Whether it was the small market square at the foot of Mount Qingming or the peaks of Mount Qingming, they were all quiet and gave off a feeling of being detached from the secular world. Mount Dongming wasn't like this. There were tall, decorated archways and several courtyards at the foot of the mountain. There was also a neatly paved bluestone road up the mountain, and there were squares and streets halfway up the mountain. It was obvious this was the real market square of Mount Dongming. The two of them looked over from the sky and could vaguely see many caves on the mountain. However, these caves were covered by green trees, and only a little of them could be vaguely seen. Otherwise, a mountain with so many caves would make one's scalp go numb. The two of them landed on the square. This time, no one came to receive them. There were simply too many cultivators coming and going on Mount Dongming. At present, the street here was much more lively than the market square on Mount Qingming. Even when they saw someone coming down, they didn't even raise their heads to look at him. Tinga looked left and right. Yi Jingwen was still leading her through the streets and alleys. His gaze was focused, as if he was quite familiar with this. After walking a few streets, sure enough, they turned into another shop. Just like the shop on Mount Qingming, the shopkeepers were all Xianxing school disciples. However, this shop was a lot bigger, and there were also a lot more shop assistants who were only mortals. These mortals were very perceptive. As soon as they saw them enter, they respectfully stepped forward and greeted the two immortal masters. Tinga was only a child following them, but she didn't fall behind. This obviously showed that this shop assistant was very good at talking. Before Yi Jingwen could say anything, a cultivator wearing Xianxing school disciple uniform came over and respectfully saluted them. He said, "Martial Uncle Yi, why are you here?" Unexpectedly, they knew each other. Seeing a cultivator coming to receive them, the mortal shop assistant retreated. Yi Jingwen answered, "I'm here on Martial Uncle Shoujing's order. Where's Senior Martial Brother Zheng?" The disciple answered, "There's a business today. Martial Uncle Zheng personally went to discuss it." "Oh." Yi Jingwen frowned slightly and muttered, "What business needs Senior Martial Brother Zheng to personally go?" He didn't have to answer. After all, he wasn't a disciple sent here, so he couldn't manage their business. However, thinking that this business wasn't important, the disciple answered, "Martial Uncle doesn't know. It's a cultivation clan that's on the verge of extinction. Marshal Uncle Zheng heard that many core formation cultivators came from that clan's ancestors, so they must have good things, so he personally went to discuss it. Oh, I see. Yi Jingwen wasn't interested in this and asked directly, then have you ever seen a person who looks like he's about 50 years old, has a foundation building cultivation level, and his surname is Yi? The disciple pondered for a long time, but eventually shook his head. Marshal Uncle Yi, the characteristics you described are too general. There are many people who look like they're in the foundation building realm. Besides, if they're not important guests, we don't know their surnames. Yi Jingwen also understood this principle. 7 or 8 out of 10 people who were stuck in the foundation building realm were of this age. This was probably because cultivators' appearances changed along with their age. People in their 50s were quite old. If they could make a realm breakthrough, they usually would have done so at this age. Therefore, most people who couldn't make a realm breakthrough were of this age. Yi Jingwen didn't make things difficult for him. He nodded and said, "Then you can go. I'm just asking around. You don't have to entertain me." The disciple saluted him, but before he left, he stopped and said, "Marshal Uncle Yi, if you're looking for someone, it'd be better to go to the steward's office at the foot of the mountain. If individual cultivators come here and want to stay for several days or rent an immortal's cave, they'll have to deal with them." This was a good idea. Yi Jingwen thanked the disciple, then took Immo Tinga out again. Once they were outside, Immo Tinga asked, "Big brother Yi, is this also a shop of your Xianxing school?" Yi Jingwen nodded. "Yes. Xianxing school has shops in market squares of medium size and above. Most of the market squares in western Kunwu have shops. Disciples who are away from home can go to these shops to ask for help." "Oh," Immo Tinga asked again, "so Xianxing school is really big?" Yi Jingwen smiled and said, "Among the 7 great cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole, Tiandao sect is the biggest cultivation group, but Xianxing school isn't bad either. Tiandao sect has 7,000 to 8,000 disciples, and Xianxing school also has 6,000 disciples. They have 7 nascent soul grandmasters, while we have 5. Among the other great cultivation groups, only Gujian sect is comparable to us. However, it's harder for sword cultivators to make realm breakthroughs. In terms of nascent soul grandmasters, they're inferior to us." Immo Tinga was puzzled. Why is it harder for sword cultivators to make realm breakthroughs? Yi Jingwen said, "Sword cultivators specialize in sword cultivation all their lives, and they spend their whole lives studying sword techniques and killing techniques. Therefore, their fighting power is slightly stronger than cultivators like us who mainly cultivate Dao laws. However, it's also because of this that they don't have time to practice cultivation techniques that focus on temperament. Most of their primordial spirits are weaker than ours, so realm breakthroughs are slower. Gujian sect doesn't have fewer disciples than us, but they have 1/5 fewer core formation and nascent soul cultivators than us." He then added, "In fact, the cultivation technique I practice is also a sword cultivator, but I'm not a pure sword cultivator, so realm breakthroughs are a bit easier than theirs." Immo Tinga didn't really understand what he said, but she slowly pondered over it. She then followed Yi Jingwen down the mountain and went straight to the heavily guarded courtyards at the foot of the mountain. Chapter 26. In the courtyard at the foot of Mount Dongming, Immo Tinga saw Yi Jingwen take out a bag from his robe and throw something out. Immediately, more than a dozen sparkling and translucent jades of different colors appeared on the table. The cultivator in the courtyard became even more attentive. Originally, he clearly said he couldn't disclose information about the tenants, but now he immediately said, "Senior, there was indeed such a cultivator who came to rent an immortal's cave not long ago. Please wait patiently. I'll go check it out." Yi Jingwen just nodded without saying anything. The cultivator flicked his sleeve, and all the jades on the table disappeared. He then asked the 2 of them to wait for a moment before he hurried into the inner room. Immo Tinga asked in confusion, "Big brother Yi, what was that? Why did he agree after you gave it to him?" Yi Jingwen said, "Did you see spiritual aura on it?" Immo Tinga nodded. She didn't think it was strange because everything she saw with Yi Jingwen these days had spiritual aura. How could things in the cultivation world not have spiritual aura? Yi Jingwen said, "This is a spirit stone. Spirit stones store spiritual aura and can be used to replenish spiritual aura in battle. They can also be used to lay formations and cultivate. They're indispensable, so we cultivators treat them like gold and silver." Tinga read about them in books, but she never knew what spirit stones looked like. It turned out they were similar to ordinary jades, except they contained spiritual aura. Before long, the cultivator came out of the inner room and said very politely to Yi Jingwen, "Senior, an individual cultivator named Yi Jiang did come here a month ago and rented an immortal's cave for 3 months." "Oh, where?" The cultivator said, "Senior, go to the square halfway up the mountain and take the path on the left. That immortal's cave is numbered 189. You could just look for it according to the number plate." Yi Jingwen nodded and said, "Thank you." Then he took Tinga out of the door. People who rented immortals' caves like them had a queue number like inns, so it was easy to leave with a number. Following the cultivator's directions, the two of them found the immortal's cave after searching for a while. This immortal's cave was a bit far from the square, and the spiritual aura was also quite ordinary. Obviously, Yi Jiang didn't plan to live here for a long time, or he didn't have anything valuable on him. "Is anyone here?" Yi Jingwen shouted, but there was no reply for a long time. He pondered for a moment before he took out the summoning talisman Lu Shishan had given him from his bosom. He poured some spiritual energy into it, but he discovered that the jade talisman was still dim and without any light. Yi Jingwen knew that Yi Jiang wasn't here. Tinga asked, "Big brother Yi, what happened?" Yi Jingwen said, "Your uncle isn't here. He's probably quite a distance away from here. That's why the messaging jade talisman can't sense him and can't be sent out." "Oh." Tinga couldn't say she was disappointed. In fact, she was a bit nervous. She had never met her father, and her mother had passed away when she was 7 years old. None of her other relatives loved her. She was a little afraid that this uncle did not like her either. Although Yi Jingwen noticed her nervousness, he didn't take it seriously. It was normal for a family member who had never met to depend on each other in the future to be nervous. Unable to find him, the two of them could only turn back. However, now that he knew where he was staying, it would be easier to find him in the future. Before leaving, Yi Jingwen took out an ordinary summoning talisman and left a message at the entrance of the cave. He planned to stay at Xianxing School Shop for a day and come back tomorrow to take a look. On their way back, Yi Jingwen said, "Don't worry. Since we've found the cave, we'll be able to see your uncle soon." In fact, Tinga wasn't worried at all. She still hadn't figured out how to face her new and future only elder. When they entered the shop, the aura-refining cultivator, who gave Yi Jingwen the idea, immediately came over. He saluted and asked, "Martial Uncle Yi, did you find him?" Yi Jingwen shook his head. "I only found a place to stay, but I haven't seen him. Are there any vacant rooms here?" "There are. Rest assured, Martial Uncle. Although the spirit veins here aren't as good as those on Mount Taikong, they're not bad either. Even if you stay here for several days, it won't affect you too much. Take me to rest for a while first. If Senior Martial Brother Zheng comes back, tell him." "Yes." Just as the cultivator was about to lead the two of them inside, they heard a voice coming from the door. "Brother Yi, please." Yi Jingwen turned around and saw the shopkeeper, Zheng Xian, and another thin old man. This person had grizzled hair and a deep frown on his face. He was also in the foundation building realm. "Brother Yi?" Before he could think too much, Zheng Xian had already seen him. A pleasantly surprised expression appeared on his face. "Junior Martial Brother Yi, why did you come?" Zheng Xian happened to be a disciple of Clear Spring Peak and was acquainted with Yi Jingwen. Yi Jingwen also smiled. "Senior Martial Brother Zheng, you're finally back." Seeing that this little junior martial brother of his had something to say, Zheng Xian turned around and smiled at the old man. He cupped his hands and said, "Brother Yi, please go upstairs and sit for a while. I'll be right there." The old man didn't have a smile on his face. He just nodded and followed the other aura-refining disciple upstairs. Yi Jingwen took another look at him. Zhang Xian looked at him with a smile, then looked at Mo Tiange, who was holding his hand. He asked, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, did you go down the mountain to accept a disciple?" Yi Jingwen smiled bitterly. "Senior Marshal Brother Zhang, you must be joking. Not to mention that we foundation-building disciples don't have the qualifications to accept disciples. I already have a headache dealing with that group of kids in Clear Spring Peak. Why would I want to accept disciples? I came under Marshal Uncle Shojing's order to find someone. I wonder if Senior Marshal Brother has heard of this person?" Oh, Zhang Xian was also a disciple of Clear Spring Peak, so he was more concerned about his martial uncle's matters. He immediately asked, "Who is it?" "It's an individual cultivator in the foundation-building realm. He's about the same age as Senior Marshal Brother. His name is Yi Jiang." Right after he finished speaking, Zhang Xian's expression became extremely surprised. Yi Jingwen frowned. "Senior Marshal Brother Zhang, what's wrong?" A smile appeared on Zhang Xian's face. "The guest I brought back is indeed called Yi Jiang, but I don't know if he's the one you're looking for." Yi Jingwen was pleasantly surprised. This was really a case of wearing out iron shoes in fruitless searching, only to find the person by chance. He promptly asked, "Is he from Yi Clan of Mount Qingming?" "Correct, but the last core formation cultivator of Yi Clan has fallen, so they no longer exist." After obtaining this answer, Yi Jingwen became even more certain that this was the person he was looking for. He immediately said, "Senior Marshal Brother, please introduce me to him." Zhang Xian smiled and nodded. "Come with me." In the guest room upstairs, the old man stood up when he saw them coming in. Zhang Xian said, "Brother Yi, this is my junior martial brother from the same sect. His surname is also Yi, and his name is Jingwen. Junior martial brother, this is Brother Yi Jiang." After the two of them greeted each other, Yi Jingwen went straight to the point. "Fellow Taoist, may I ask if your surname is Yi, and your name is Jiang? Are you a cultivator from Yi Clan of Mount Qingming?" Yi Jiang didn't understand what was going on, but since Zhang Xian was being so cautious, he answered seriously, "Yes, but Yi Clan of Mount Qingming no longer exists." His expression was dejected. Obviously, he was depressed that Yi Clan's inheritance had ended in his hands. Yi Jingwen asked again, "Then, fellow Taoist Yi, are you Senior Yi Hai's younger brother?" A surprised look appeared on Yi Jiang's face. If someone asked him this question in the past, he wouldn't have been surprised because his elder brother was very famous. Many people in Western Kunwa knew about Yi Hai of Mount Qingming, but things were different now. His elder brother went missing on Demonic Mountain 10 years ago, and news of his death was confirmed several days ago. Even Yi Clan had disappeared, so how could someone still ask about him? Even so, he still answered with a calm expression, "Yes." Upon hearing his affirmation, Yi Jingwen heaved a sigh of relief. He pushed Mo Tiange forward and said, "Brother Yi, I was ordered by Marshal Uncle Shojing to descend the mountain to look for Senior Yi Hai's descendant and hand him over to you." Chapter 27. Yi Jiang stared at the child in front of him in disbelief. Just now, Yi Jingwen said to him, "This is Senior Yi Hai's daughter in the secular world. I was ordered by Marshal Uncle to pick her up and give her to you." Daughter? He knew his elder brother wandered in the secular world and later went to Demonic Mountain. He didn't have time to explain anything before he died, but he didn't expect his elder brother to leave behind a daughter. Yi Jingwen said, "Senior Yi left his last words. I'll give them to Brother Yi now." Yi Jiang hastily took the jade slip and inserted his divine sense into it. Green smoke rose in front of him and turned into a middle-aged scholar. He looked at him and said, "Second brother, it seems big brother can't escape this disaster, so I have to tell you some things. On this trip to Demonic Mountain, Master Taoist Shojing of Xianqing School and I became companions. After I'm done, I'll use my remaining power to help him escape and bring these words to you. To make a long story short, first, after I die, Yi Clan probably won't be able to stand on Mount Qingming. Move out of Mount Qingming and focus on preserving your bloodline. When a core formation cultivator appears in the clan, you can take back the spirit vein. Second, Use the clan's books and records as much as you can. If you don't have a successor when you die, leave the cultivation technique books and records in the clan. Third, a few years before I went to Demonic Mountain, I actually married a wife and gave birth to a daughter in the secular world. Although that woman was a mortal, she had a pure body. After thinking for a long time, I decided to have children with her. If my daughter happens to inherit her pure body and spiritual roots, she'll be the hope of clan. Unfortunately, before I left, my daughter wasn't born yet, so I don't know if my wish was fulfilled. Fourth, I'll entrust my funeral affairs to Master Taoist Shojing. He'll deliver my belongings to you. I also asked him to find my wife and daughter. If my wife is still alive, I hope you can treat them well. Fifth, Master Taoist Shojing made a heart demon oath to me. You can trust him. Imo Chinga timidly looked at the old man in front of her. This man looked like he was in his 50s. His hair was white and he looked like her grandfather. How could he be her uncle? Yi Jiang showed a sorrowful expression. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw Imo Chinga in front of him. This child looked very similar to his eldest brother. He would believe her if she said she was his eldest brother's flesh and blood. With this thought in mind, he stretched out his left palm and pointed with his right hand, forcing a drop of blood from the tip of his finger. With another slash, that drop of blood flew towards Imo Chinga. Imo Chinga was startled. That drop of blood rushed towards her very quickly and eventually disappeared between her eyebrows. She felt her head heating up and was confused for a moment, but she immediately sobered up. She saw this uncle who looked like a grandfather walking toward her. He lowered his head and stroked the spirit-gathering beads on her wrist. He said repeatedly, "Yes, this was given to me by the previous generation's core formation ancestor when Big Brother cultivated to the third layer of the aura refining realm." As he spoke, he took a step forward and hugged her tightly, repeatedly saying, "Child, poor child, it's really been hard on you. Don't worry, in the future, with second uncle here, you won't be helpless anymore." "Yi Jiang of Eof," he said, and held her, and said, Child, what's your name?" Although she was unfamiliar with him and wasn't used to relying on a stranger, Imo Chinga didn't push him away. After a long time, Yi Jiang let her go, wiped the tears from his eyes, and asked softly, "Child, what's your name?" I'm Imo Chinga." "Imo?" Yi Jingwen answered, "Brother Yi, you don't know. Senior Yi Hai married into the family in the secular world, so this child took her mother's surname." "Oh, I see." Yi Jiang didn't care. We cultivators don't care about these customs. No matter what her surname is, she's our child. "That's right." Yi Jingwen hesitated for a moment and said, "Brother Yi, you must know the ins and outs. I'm really sorry that this child's mother didn't survive." Yi Jiang shook his head and smiled at him. "My elder brother has already explained everything clearly in this jade slip. I still have to thank fellow Taoist Yi for finding my niece." Yi Jiang, thank you." Yi Jingwen hurriedly said with a smile. "Brother Yi, it's such a coincidence that we both have the surname Yi, and we have such a fated encounter. How about I be thick-skinned and call you Big Brother?" How could Yi Jiang not see that Yi Jingwen was an elite disciple of Xianqing School? He reached the foundation building realm at a young age, so his position in the school must be higher than Zheng Xian, the shopkeeper of Mount Dongming. It was also very likely that he would form his gold core in the future. At his age, his chances of forming his gold core were already slim. Yi Jingwen's intention to befriend him must be because of Master Taoist Shojing. However, this was beneficial to him and his nephew, so he didn't refuse. "Brother, since you think so highly of me, I'll accept this Big Brother." Yi Jingwen nodded with a smile. Zheng Xian, who was at the side, laughed and said, "Brother Yi, we're really a family now. Since you're friends with Martial Uncle Shou Jing and your brothers with my junior brother Yi, there's no need for us to stand on ceremony." Yi Jiang also smiled and nodded while stroking his beard. Then, with an apologetic expression, he said, "However, there's one thing that I must ask for Brother Zhang's forgiveness for. Elder brother has given an order, and I have just found this niece. Can you allow me to choose a few items from the auction?" Of course. Zheng Xian didn't look the least bit annoyed. Instead, it looked very friendly. Brother Yi, you don't have to be so polite. From now on, we'll treat each other as one of our own. Yi Jingwen said to Zheng Xian, Senior Marshal Brother Zheng, I've been with this child for some time, so I've developed some feelings for her. Let me see you off. Zheng Xian was the shopkeeper of the market square, so he naturally had good eyes. He could see that Yi Jingwen had other important things to tell him, so he didn't ask. Of course. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, please go. Yi Jingwen and Yi Jiang cupped their hands apologetically, then left with Mo Tinga. Before they left, Yi Jiang held Mo Tinga's hand in a very natural manner and led her to his flying magic tool. Then he said to Yi Jingwen, Brother, let's go to my temporary immortal's cave and have a chat. Yi Jingwen also thought the same, so he said without hesitation, Okay. Yi Jiang's flying magic tool was a horsetail whisk, so it didn't fly very fast. Fast flying wasn't allowed on Mount Dongming, so everyone abided by this rule whenever there were other cultivators. Flying wasn't allowed inside the market square, and they also had to slow down around the market square. The three of them slowly flew east and soon arrived at Yi Jiang's temporary immortal's cave. Yi Jiang waved his hand, closing the cave's defensive formation, and the three of them sat down. This was Mo Tinga's first time seeing an immortal's cave. She saw that everything was either made of stone or jade. The ceiling of the immortal's cave was inlaid with glowing stones, which seemed to be the moonstone Li Yushan took out. Yi Jiang asked her a few more questions. Seeing that she was very interested in the immortal's cave, he told her to go play by herself while he talked to Yi Jingwen. Yi Jingwen watched Mo Tinga leave and sighed. I won't hide it from Big Brother. These days, I really miss Tinga. This child has suffered a lot, so her temperament is much stronger than ordinary children. Upon hearing him praising Mo Tinga, Yi Jiang stroked his beard and said with a smile, I hope this child is a promising talent. By the way, how are her spiritual roots? Upon hearing this question, Yi Jingwen was a bit hesitant. I've already tested her. She has 5 spiritual roots and a pure Yin constitution. I don't know if she's lucky or unlucky. Being able to inherit both spiritual roots and a pure Yin constitution was naturally lucky. However, a pure Yin constitution had 5 spiritual roots. If her spiritual roots were slightly better, she would certainly have extraordinary achievements in the future. What? Yi Jiang was shocked. Did this child really inherit a pure Yin constitution? Originally, he didn't have much hope. Now that he saw that this child was in the second layer of the aura refining realm, he only felt lucky that she had spiritual roots. As for a pure Yin constitution, he didn't have much hope. After all, the probability of that happening wasn't high. Yi Jingwen nodded. Correct. This child only has 5 spiritual roots. Although she was able to cultivate to the second layer of the aura refining realm in the secular world, thanks to the spirit gathering pearls, she definitely wouldn't have been able to cultivate to this level without a pure Yin constitution and a good cultivation technique. Upon hearing this, Yi Jiang's heart was filled with mixed feelings. He didn't know whether he should be happy or worried. A pure Yin constitution was a good constitution for cultivation. Unfortunately, this child also had 5 spiritual roots. If she couldn't cultivate, this constitution would cause her to get into trouble. If someone found out about it, Yi Jingwen observed Yi Jiang's expression. Seeing Yi Jiang's gloomy expression, he guessed what he was thinking. He immediately smiled and said, Big brother, rest assured. Martial Uncle Shoujing gave her a spirit-concealing pendant. As long as she doesn't leave her side, no one will find out. Oh, Yi Jiang was a bit surprised, but he soon felt relieved. This was what he was most worried about. Yi Jingwen took out a bag from his robe and handed it to Yi Jiang. He said, Big brother, this is what your brother left behind. The cultivation technique inside is Yi Clan's secret codex. There are also medicinal pills, spirit stones, and so on. Presumably, the two of you won't be lacking for the time being. Yi Jiang took the bag and said with a grateful expression, Thank you. When a cultivator passed away, their belongings would be divided among the living. Presumably, Master Taoist Shoujing owed them a huge favor, so he sent these things back. Otherwise, no one would say anything even if he took them away. In the end, Yi Jingwen said, "Big brother, Marshal Uncle Shoujing asked me to ask you, are you willing to join Xianqing school?" This. Yi Jiang didn't expect Master Taoist Shoujing to say this. Normally, Master Taoist Shoujing should have already repaid his debt of gratitude by doing these things, but he actually invited them to join Xianqing school. This was really beyond Yi Jiang's expectations. Yi Jingwen smiled and stood up. "Big brother, think about it carefully. I won't disturb you two uncle and nephew's chat any longer. If you've made a decision, please come to the shop and let me know so I can go back and report." Yi Jiang hastily stood up to see them off. "Yes, I'll think about it carefully. If I've made a decision, I'll tell brother." Chapter 28. Mo Tiange was a bit afraid of this second uncle she'd never seen before. Not only did she not address him, but she also had a guarded expression on her face. But Yi Jiang didn't care. He was already old. He had married and had children before, so his living bloodline was several generations apart. Moreover, they were mortals, so they didn't have any kinship with him. His relationship with his eldest brother had always been very good. Now that he saw Mo Tiange and confirmed that she really had Yi clan's bloodline, he was very excited. After Yi Jingwen left, Yi Jiang carefully asked Mo Tiange about her life in the secular world. Then he excitedly taught her some things about cultivation and gave her a lot of strange things. During the few days she spent with Yi Jingwen, Mo Tiange always saw him taking out strange things from his robe. Sometimes he even took out flying swords and the like, but she couldn't tell what they were. Yi Jingwen said he actually kept a Qinquan bag in his robe, and all the things he took out came from it. This made her extremely envious. Now, second uncle had given her one. This Qinquan bag looked like a leather bag. It had a brownish-yellow fur and was smooth to the touch. She didn't know what it was made of, but the opening was snow-white and looked very delicate. Mo Tiange followed second uncle's instructions and inserted a bit of spiritual aura into the bag. Sure enough, her hand smoothly reached into the bag. It was empty, but it had a lot of space. Yi Jiang looked at her with a smile on his face. There was also a bottle. When she pulled the cork off the bottle, rich spiritual aura immediately rushed out. She hastily put it back, then put several things into the Qinquan bag she just got. She raised her head and looked at Yi Jiang with a bit of embarrassment. She whispered, "Second uncle." Yi Jiang smiled and stroked her head. "You don't need to be so reserved. I'm your second uncle." "It's true." Mo Tiange nodded, but she still felt a bit distant. Yi Jiang didn't force her. He gently asked, "Tiange, how did Yi Jingwen treat you on the way here?" Mo Tiange thought for a moment, then answered, "Big brother Yi is very good." "Oh, then do you want to go back to Xianqing school with him?" This. Mo Tiange was hesitant. Yi Jiang said, "I think you don't know, so I'll tell you in detail. If you join a large sect like Xianqing school, there will be many benefits. Not only will you get spirit stones and medicinal pills every month, but if you worship a good master, your cultivation will be greatly improved. Most importantly, with Xianqing school's name, you'll be able to enjoy the shade under a big tree." After a pause, he sighed. Of course, there are also disadvantages. Firstly, in a big sect, the high-level cultivators have their own factions, and the junior cultivators also have their own cliques, so it's not easy to get along with each other. Secondly, the sect rules are very strict, and there's a lot less freedom compared to being a loose cultivator. Thirdly, you have a pure Yin constitution, and I'm worried that they already have a plan. Mo Tiange also understood that he'd planned this for a long time. Just like the ancestor who passed her cultivation technique to her. When she was ignorant, her future was already decided by others. He then heard Yi Jiang say, "Although your father said in his last words that this Taoist master Shoujing made a heart's devil oath, this matter can't be considered as a violation of the oath. Besides, that Yi Jingwen was so enthusiastic, I have a feeling that this isn't the end." Mo Tiange hesitated for a long time before she finally said, "Second uncle, it's up to you. I have no objections." If it was between Yi Jingwen and second uncle, she would trust second uncle more. After all, this had nothing to do with Yi Jingwen. Yi Jiang muttered to himself for a long time before he came up with an idea. He said, Tinga, wait here for a moment. Second uncle will be back soon. Yes. Tinga couldn't wait to be alone. She was still unfamiliar with this second uncle of hers, so she still felt somewhat uncomfortable. Yi Jiang took out several jade slips from his bosom and said, If you're bored, you can use these to pass the time. Second uncle has laid a formation in this cave. Be careful. If you accidentally enter the formation, don't move and wait for second uncle to return. Got it. Tinga took the jade slip. Yi Jiang got up and left the abode. Tinga watched as his silhouette disappeared. She then looked down at the jade slip in her hand. Her divine sense was still very weak, so she could only put the jade slip on her forehead to see the contents inside. Some of these jade slips contained experiences, and some contained cultivation techniques. After Tinga looked through them one by one, her attention was attracted by one of the jade slips. The title of this jade slip was very simple. There were only 4 words, the Tao of Formations. The opening said, Heaven and Earth, Yin and Yang, the 5 elements and 8 trigrams. If you want to understand formations, you must first understand their meanings. Soon after, it explained the meanings of Yin and Yang, the 5 elements and 8 trigrams in detail. To understand formations, one must first be proficient in using Yin and Yang, the 5 elements and 8 trigrams. Tinga was fascinated by it. Although Taoist cultivation techniques were mostly interlinked, and the art of Sunu she cultivated also had discussions about Yin and Yang, the 5 elements and 8 trigrams, it wasn't as deep as this one. Moreover, the several simple formations listed at the end made her sigh with amazement. After an unknown amount of time, the door of the cave suddenly opened. Yi Jiang walked in with a gloomy expression. Tinga looked up, but before she could greet him, Yi Jiang had already pulled her up. Tinga, let's go. Huh? She was stunned. Second uncle, what's wrong? Yi Jiang sneered. Fortunately, I was careful and secretly listened to what they were talking about. That Zheng Xian asked Yi Jingwen what was going on. Although Yi Jingwen didn't say it, he was sure it was Master Taoist Shoujing who wanted you to join Xianqing school. They obviously have a plot against you. Tinga was speechless upon hearing what he said. Yi Jingwen has been taking good care of me all this time. Could it be that he also harbors evil intentions? Yi Jiang said, Tinga, quickly pack your things. We'll leave immediately. She originally didn't have anything to pack, so she just asked, Second uncle, where are we going? Yi Jiang paused for a moment, then sighed. Kunwu is so big. We'll just go to the east. I don't think they'll be able to find us in a short time. But it's hard on you. You're still so young, yet you have to follow second uncle to wander around. Tinga shook her head. She naturally knew that if it wasn't for her, second uncle wouldn't have anything to plot against. It was only because of her that he was forced to leave. Thinking up to this point, she felt closer to this second uncle of hers. In the end, he was her relative. Others didn't take her seriously, but second uncle was still considerate of her. The uncle and nephew duo quickly packed their things. Yi Jiang also removed the formation he laid at the entrance of the cave. He didn't even refund the extra rent. The two of them quietly left Mount Dongming. Tinga watched the cultivators coming and going on Mount Dongming under her feet. She clenched her fists, then left with second uncle. Perhaps it was because of their innate bloodline connection, but she was more willing to believe in second uncle. She had never hated herself as much as she did now. If it wasn't because of this physique, they wouldn't have had to flee in such a hurry. Second uncle could have joined Xianqing school and cultivated diligently. Perhaps he would have even had a chance of forming his gold core. But now, second uncle had become an individual cultivator and had to take her away from West Kunwu. Perhaps he wouldn't be able to make a realm breakthrough for the rest of his life. Tinga secretly vowed that one day she would build her foundation, form her gold core, and even form her nascent soul like her ancestors. That way, she wouldn't need anyone to sacrifice themselves for her, and she wouldn't have to be afraid of other people coveting her. This was the true meaning of cultivation for her. Chapter 29. At the southern end of the celestial pole, there was a mountain range known as Kunwu. Kunwu stretched for thousands of miles and was surrounded by endless mountain ranges. Since ancient times, no one had been able to pass through it. Mortals not far from the mountain range could occasionally see dense purple clouds and colorful flashing lights in the mountains. If they went into the mountains to search, they would get lost in the clouds and could only turn back to find the way out. Gradually, people learned that this mountain was an immortal mountain that only immortals could enter. Those immortals came and went with the clouds and mist, looking like immortals. They could call the wind and summon the rain. If they found people with spiritual roots in the mortal world, they would bring them back to the immortal mountain to cultivate. People in the mortal world all hoped to enter the immortal mountain and refine their immortal bones. Unfortunately, spiritual roots were hard to find. Most people had only heard about immortals in legends. Squatting at a roadside stall in the market, a young boy with a childish face was holding a secular book and reading it with great interest. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he frowned, and when he saw something interesting, he would laugh out loud, not caring about the looks of others. Fortunately, this was the immortal cultivation market square under the jurisdiction of Mount Yunwu, a cultivation sect. People coming and going were either cultivators or mortals who were used to such things. If this was in the secular world, this kind of behavior would have already attracted the attention of many people. Xiaodian, what book are you reading? Are mortal books this interesting? A middle-aged Taoist at the stall next to him looked at him with a smile and asked while stroking his beard. The teenager called Xiaotian raised his head and said, "Uncle Huang, this book isn't interesting at all. I just thought it was interesting that those mortals look at us cultivators like this." "Oh." The teenager put down the book and said, "This book is about an immortal who eliminates evil and helps the weak in the mortal world, robbing the rich to help the poor." Later, the emperor of the secular world wanted to recruit him into the court, but in the end, he just left and is free and unfettered in the mortal world. TSK. The teenager shook his head and said, "Immortals don't benefit their cultivation, so why would they enter the secular world? It's clear that mortals have too good of an illusion about immortals." The Taoist surnamed Huang shook his head and said, "Mortals are just daydreaming. How can they imagine the difficulty of cultivation? The immortals that mortals talked about were actually cultivators like them. It was said that when one reached the pinnacle of cultivation, one could ascend to the celestial world and become an immortal. However, this was only a legend. As far as he knew, the highest realm of cultivators was only the deity transformation stage, and that was a matter from 1,000 years ago. That senior had long gone into seclusion, and it was unknown whether he was still alive or not. As for the remaining 4 realms, aura refining, foundation building, gold core, and nascent soul, each was more difficult to advance than the other. In the entire celestial pole, there were only several hundred people who had reached the nascent soul realm. The youth in front of him and Taoist Huang were only qi condensation cultivators. In this market square, there weren't many foundation establishment cultivators, and there weren't any golden core cultivators at all. The two of them sighed. The Taoist looked at his stall and said, "Little Tian, you haven't opened for business today, right?" Speaking of this, the young man sighed. "Before you came, there were people who came to ask, but they said that my things were too expensive. If second uncle wasn't in urgent need of medicinal pills, I would have directly sold them to the shop. It's a pity that the shopkeeper doesn't know what's good for him." On his stall, there were a few array discs and array flags. These things could be used to lay formations, which are needed by all cultivators. They could be used to guard against others during cultivation or to gather spiritual aura. However, the path of formations was profound and unfathomable. Even several hundred years of research wouldn't be enough. Cultivators probably didn't have long lives, so there weren't many people who were willing to invest time in this path. Most sects and clans would have formation masters, and it was rare to see one among individual cultivators. Normally, his array disc should be very popular. However, These formations weren't common goods in the cultivation world, and the materials were hard to come by, so the price was very high. He had been on display for several days. From time to time, people came to ask about it, but they all shook their heads and left. Although the formation was good, if they couldn't afford it, they also couldn't sell it. The Taoists surnamed Huang's stall sold low-grade talismans, but they sold much better than Mo Tianga's. After being on display for one day, they were almost sold out. At this time, Taoist Huang hesitated for a while, then asked, "Little Tian, what's the lowest price for your formation?" "Ah, Uncle Huang, do you want it?" the youth said in surprise. "If you want it, 300 spirit stones are enough." The previous price of this array disc was 400 spirit stones, which was indeed very favorable. Taoist Huang pondered for a while, then happily nodded. "All right, Uncle Huang will take advantage of you." He took out the money he earned from selling talismans today and counted his savings. The two of them handed over the spirit stones in one hand and the formation disc in the other. The youth took out a jade slip from his robe. "Uncle Huang, this is how to set up a formation. As long as you have the main formation flag, you can use this formation to attack and defend." Taoist Huang felt heartache as he handed over the spirit stones. He nodded and said, "I just know that the formation made by your uncle and nephew is definitely worth such a high price. If it's someone else, I really wouldn't be able to buy it." Even cultivation group disciples would need several years to accumulate 300 spirit stones, and individual cultivators might need to accumulate it for many years. If Taoist Huang wasn't good at making money, he most likely wouldn't be able to fork out this much money. "Uncle Huang, thank you very much. I'm going to buy some medicinal pills. Uncle is still waiting for me." After packing up his stall, the youth went to the shop opened by Mount Yunwu. Although Mount Yunwu was only a small cultivation group in the cultivation world, there were still many clans and individual cultivators who attached themselves to it. Many individual cultivators relied on Mount Yunwu's market square to obtain spirit stones for their cultivation. Mount Yunwu's shop was the largest shop in the market square. When the youth entered the shop assistant greeted him. "Fellow Taoist, what would you like?" The shop assistant was in the early stage of the aura refining realm. Seeing that the youth was only in the middle stage of the aura refining realm, he was quite polite. The youth said, "Do you have 10 small reversion pills?" Small reversion pills were healing medicine, so they were quite expensive. When people came to buy them, they usually only bought 1 or 2 pills. 10 pills was already considered a big deal. Upon hearing what the youth said, the smile on the shop assistant's face became even wider. Yes. Please wait a moment." The shop assistant turned around and reported to the shopkeeper. He then took out a jade bottle from behind the counter. "These are small reversion pills. Please identify them." The shop assistant removed the bottle stopper and poured out a pill. A medicinal fragrance immediately assailed his nostrils. After carefully smelling it, he nodded and said, "These are the pills. There are 10 pills in total. That's a total of 500 spirit stones. If you have any rare items, you can also exchange them." The youth didn't say anything. He just took out the spirit stones from his storage bag and gave them to the shop assistant to count. After carefully putting the medicinal pills into his storage bag, the youth happily walked out of the shop. With these 10 small reversion pills, second uncle's injuries should be healed. After the youth left the shop, he made several turns and arrived at a small courtyard. Soon after, he made a hand seal and the courtyard's door opened. The youth entered the courtyard, pushed open the door, and called out, "Second uncle?" After a long time, a voice came from the corner. "Little Tian, you're back." The voice was old and hoarse. An old man sat cross-legged on the bed in the corner. His face was dark green, and he looked old. The youth walked over and excitedly took out the jade bottle from his robe. "Second uncle, Uncle Huang bought our 5 elements life and death formation. We've collected enough money to buy medicine." "Really?" The old man forced a smile and took the jade bottle from the youth. He then sighed and said, "I told you it's useless, but you still bought it. If you used it to buy aura-nourishing pills, your cultivation level could increase by at least 3 layers and reach the 10th layer. At that time, the Immortals' assembly would be easy." The youth said angrily, "Second uncle." The old man stopped talking and looked at him with a sigh. The youth finally smiled. "Second uncle, don't worry. Although my cultivation level isn't that high, I've practiced magic for a long time, so I'm also very hopeful." Even so, the old man's expression didn't soften. He only said, "If it doesn't work, we'll talk about it next time. Safety is more important. Don't fight recklessly." "I know. The most important thing for us cultivators is life. If we can't live forever, what's the point of cultivating? I'll definitely come back safely." The old man finally smiled. "It's good that you think that way. There are still 10 days left until the Immortals Assembly. You have to prepare well, especially the way to use spirit tools. This is a way to save your life. And, second uncle, you should heal your injuries first. I'm going to cultivate." "Okay, go." The youth left the room and opened the door of the next room. He fetched some water to wash his face and untied his hair to comb it again. A beautiful and bright face was reflected in the mirror. But in the next moment, he tied the hairband again and turned back into a young man. Yi Xiaodian was her current name. The name Mo Tinga shouldn't appear before she formed her gold core. This was second uncle's decision when he left Mount Dongming. In the past 7 years, she followed second uncle to wander all over East Kunwu. They picked medicinal plants, opened a shop, and caught beasts. Second uncle's accident happened to the shop when he couldn't keep it open anymore, so he had to catch demonic beasts to make money. In the beginning, Yi clan had a lot of treasures, and Master Daoist Shojing also returned her father's belongings, so they were quite rich. But the path of cultivation consumed too much, not to mention their spiritual roots weren't good. Second uncle had 4 spiritual roots. He was able to build his foundation thanks to the medicinal pills his father gave him. Mo Tinga, on the other hand, had 5 spiritual roots. Although she had a good cultivation technique, every step she took was difficult. She was able to cultivate to the 7th layer of the aura refining realm in 7 years because of the medicinal pills second uncle gave her. In the past few years, they used up all their spirit stones for cultivation, so they had to think of ways to make more money. Originally, they only went to pick spiritual plants to exchange for medicinal pills, but they found that they couldn't afford to cultivate. Therefore, they used all their savings to open a shop in a small market square. Because the cultivation clan that managed the market square bullied them, they didn't make much money, so they had to close the shop and look for another place. Finally, second uncle found that catching demonic beasts was very profitable. So he teamed up with other cultivators to hunt beasts in the depths of the mountain in the south. One time, they accidentally encountered a 5th-rank lightning beast, which was equivalent to a core formation cultivator. Of the 5 of them, 1 died and 4 were injured. Second uncle was injured, so his situation became even more difficult. Not only could he no longer use medicinal pills to cultivate, but he also had to treat second uncle's injuries. Fortunately, Yi clan originally had a deep understanding of formations. Although their spiritual roots weren't good, they were very talented in formations. Uncle and nephew studied formations every day. When Mo Tinga had free time, she would set up a small stall and sell them in exchange for medicinal pills, and so on. Second uncle always said that if she continued like this, she wouldn't be able to build her foundation. Therefore, a year ago, they came to Mount Yunwu with the intention of entering Yunwu sect through the Immortals Assembly. In this way, the sect would have its own benefits, and she would be able to relax a lot. The so-called Immortals Assembly was a method for individual cultivators like them to join a cultivation group. Most individual cultivators didn't have good spiritual roots, and these cultivation groups only accepted disciples with at least 3 spiritual roots. Only cultivators from cultivation clans that had a good relationship with the cultivation group could join with 4 spiritual roots. Individual cultivators like them obviously couldn't do that. However, even if their spiritual roots weren't good, there were always some people who got lucky and made rapid progress in their cultivation. The purpose of this Immortals Assembly was to select these cultivators with potential to join a cultivation group. As for the method of selection, it was simply a competition in the ring. Once they went on the ring, life and death didn't matter. Although most cultivation groups had core formation cultivators to keep watch, They couldn't guarantee that there would be no casualties. Sometimes, the fights were fierce, and there were even tragedies where both sides perished together. Tinga naturally didn't want to learn from them and risk her life. Although she followed second uncle all these years as a vagrant, it broadened her horizons. Second uncle also treated her very well, and the two of them depended on each other for survival. She also walked out of the shadow of her childhood, and her temperament became a lot more cheerful. She firmly remembered what second uncle said. The goal of cultivation was to live a long life, and life was the most important thing. Besides, she didn't think her life would be over if she couldn't enter a cultivation group. Second uncle said that her father also built his foundation and formed his gold core on his own. It was because of him that Yi clan was able to survive on Mount Qingming for another 200 years. Since her father could do it, she could also do it. Having made up her mind, she sat on the bed and began today's cultivation. Chapter 30. Tinga finished running her great circulatory cycle and withdrew her spiritual aura. She then opened her eyes, preparing to practice spells. Ever since she entered the middle stage of the aura refining realm, she didn't only practice the art of Senu. Second uncle said that although this technique was brilliant, it didn't have a way to deal with enemies in the early stage. Moreover, it was easy for people to see through it. Cultivators from big cultivation groups didn't care, but individual cultivators like her had to fight from time to time, so it was better for her to learn some practical spells. After her realm stabilized, second uncle gave her the Greenwood incantation. This incantation was part of the Yi clan's collection. Ordinary disciples with wood spirit roots all practiced this incantation. Firstly, this incantation could be practiced until the core formation realm, which was enough for ordinary cultivators. Secondly, this incantation was exceptionally powerful in fights of magical power. In the past few years, Tinga had become proficient in using this art for the sake of the Immortals' assembly. Now that she had finished practicing the art of Senu, she began to practice the spells of the Greenwood art. With a flip of her palm, several unknown seeds appeared in her hand. With a flick of her fingers, those seeds fell at the foot of the table. They quickly sprouted and grew into thorns, firmly entangling the table. Tinga looked at the thorns and shook her head. If she wasn't fast enough, the table wouldn't move, but the person would. Soon after, she condensed a small fireball on her fingertip. She threw the fireball at the thorns, quickly burning them to ashes, but the table's legs weren't damaged at all. This was the result of her 2 years of practice. She could control her spiritual aura to a subtle level, so she could burn anything she wanted. It could be said that it was an enhanced effect of Li Yushan's technique of burning a wall without damaging it. Using the Greenwood art to use seeds to cast the entanglement technique and fire spirit technique to control the enemy was the technique she came up with. Soon after, she practiced for a while. When she saw that the sky was bright, Tinga got up, washed up, and went out to get some food. Cultivators in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm could abstain from eating, and cultivators in the foundation building realm could be free from dirt. She was only in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm, so she still needed to eat and bathe. Basically, she was still immortal. Therefore, it was an unwritten rule in the cultivation world that aura refining cultivators couldn't perform closed-door meditation for too long. After all, if you performed closed-door meditation for several months, you'd come out with a sore back and dirty body. Tinga had never eaten fasting pills. First, although fasting pills were cheap, they were still medicinal pills. Second, how could fasting pills compare to real food? Although the mortal world's fire and smoke would increase the body's impurities, spirit beasts would not have to worry about this problem. Furthermore, it would increase the body's spiritual energy by a small amount. Although there weren't many spirit beasts capable of fighting, other beasts that had absorbed spiritual aura could be found everywhere. After all, this was the Kuma mountain range. He walked out of the door and headed towards the dense forest behind the market. Every cultivator loved to eat fasting pills because they thought there would be impurities after they entered the world. Not everyone knew that eating spiritual beasts and spiritual plants wasn't a problem. And how could mortals dare to eat spiritual beasts? Because of that, Emotinga never had to worry about food. She just needed to casually go to this forest and catch a bird or pheasant. Once she entered the forest, she immediately saw a fat spiritual rabbit jumping around. Emotinga was delighted. Speaking of delicious, rabbits were still the best. However, rabbits had too many natural enemies, so they were rarely seen. Emotinga threw a seed, which immediately turned into an entanglement technique and firmly bound the rabbit. The rabbit panicked, but Emotinga waved her hand. A wind blade flew past, and the rabbit fell to the ground. She walked over, picked up the rabbit, and threw it into her chinquin bag. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to kill it if she caught it, so she always killed it first before picking it up. Second uncle always said she wasn't ruthless enough. The cultivation world was full of dangers. Merely advancing to the inner demon couldn't stop some people from doing bad things. After all, inner demons would only appear when one advanced to the core formation realm. There were hundreds of thousands of cultivators in the celestial pole, but there were only a few thousand core formation cultivators. What happened to Li Yushan when she was a child, and later when she was forced to leave Mount Dongming, made her realize that she must have great strength and be unafraid of blood. In order to protect herself, she even had to kill the other party first, just like Yi Jingwen. When he realized Li Yushan had bad intentions, he directly killed him without so much as a frown. However, even though she knew this, she still wasn't used to it. Perhaps only after experiencing blood could she slowly get used to killing. After catching a rabbit, she picked some wild vegetables and weeds in the forest. Just as she was about to stand up and go back, she suddenly sensed two breaths approaching her, causing her to stop. There were two sets of footsteps, which meant there were two people. This place only had some common beasts and plants with spiritual aura. Normally, no one would come here. So why were there two people coming here all of a sudden? Unable to suppress her curiosity, she curbed her breath and crouched behind a shrub, peeking through the gaps between the leaves and grass. Sure enough, there were two people. She saw two pairs of feet. One was wearing black boots while the other was wearing embroidered shoes. Apparently, they were a man and a woman. The man's footsteps stopped first. He then said softly, "Little Sister Lien, there should be no one here." The woman didn't answer. Emotinga moved slightly and finally saw the whole picture. She saw a young cultivator, a man and a woman, looking at each other with eyes full of tenderness. Their hands were tightly clasped together. It was obvious that they were very amorous. Emotinga suddenly felt so regretful that she wanted to bang her head against the wall. This was clearly a young couple looking for a place to have a rendezvous. Emotinga didn't look over there. She crouched down and hesitated. It was obviously inappropriate to go out now. Among these two people, the man was in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm, like her, while the woman was in the 6th layer. If it wasn't because she practiced the art of Sunu and her breath-concealing divine sense was stronger than theirs, she would have been discovered long ago. If she went out now, they would think she harbored bad intentions. Moreover, if their tryst was discovered, they would most likely teach her a lesson. She didn't want to be beaten up for no reason. Just as she was regretting her actions, the man spread his robe on the ground and unexpectedly hugged little Sister Lien, intending to do something improper. When Emotinga realized this, she turned pale with fright. She thought they were just a couple looking for a place to be lovey-dovey. Who would have thought they actually wanted to, based on the sounds coming from the other side? The two of them were obviously hugging and kissing each other. Little Sister Lien took the time to say, "Be careful of your clothes." The man uttered an "N" but didn't stop. The two of them took off their clothes and went straight to the main topic at an extremely fast speed. Emotinga suddenly had the urge to bury herself when she heard the raging fire and dry firewood on the other side. She had been disguised as a man for many years. Usually, if she wasn't concentrating on cultivating, she was studying the Tao of formations with second uncle. She didn't understand these matters between men and women at all. Therefore, she felt extremely embarrassed at this moment. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look in that direction. After an unknown amount of time, the sounds on the other side gradually calmed down. The man said, "Little Sister Lien, there's only 1 month left until the Immortals' Assembly. How are your family's preparations?" Little Sister Lien's voice was so soft that it seemed water could drip out of it. She said in a sweet voice, "It's not easy to see each other, yet you're asking about these things?" The man hastily coaxed her. "Doesn't that mean I want to enter Yunwu's sect with you? If we enter the sect, our family won't be able to control us anymore. At that time, we can become dual cultivation partners and live together." Little Sister Lien was a bit hesitant. "I actually have some confidence." The man said, "Some? What kind of treasure did your family give you?" Little Sister Lien smiled but didn't answer. Mo Tienga was curious, so she once again peeked through the bushes. She saw a naked man and a woman tangled together, their bodies only covered with some clothes. She silently told herself to ignore them several times in her heart before she looked at their appearances again. Both of them were about 20 years old. The man was quite handsome, and the woman was also gentle and lovely. It was no wonder from what they said that they were actually dating without their family's knowledge. Beauty was really harmful. The man hugged Little Sister Lien and repeatedly coaxed her. "Good Little Sister Lien, just tell me. Otherwise, I really won't feel at ease." Perhaps the concern in his voice moved Little Sister Lien because she said, "Father gave me the enchanting lantern. Presumably, no matter who my opponent is, I'll have some confidence." Although her tone sounded humble, it was actually very confident. Mo Tienga was very curious. What was this enchanting lantern? Why was this woman so confident? In the Immortals' Assembly, there were 10th layer aura refining cultivators, but most of them were 7th layer aura refining cultivators like Mo Tienga, which was the peak of the middle stage of the aura refining realm. This woman was only in the 6th layer of the aura refining realm, so her cultivation level could be considered low, yet she actually thought she'd have some confidence no matter who her opponent was. The man said, "I see. Now I don't have to worry anymore. Little Sister Lien, you'll definitely enter Yunwu's sect." At that time, the unfinished meaning in his words made Little Sister Lien blush again. The man moved closer to her, and the two of them started to become intimate again. Mo Tienga withdrew her gaze, but she was somewhat puzzled. Just now, she seemed to have seen a flash of killing intent in this man's eyes. Was she mistaken? Chapter 31. Before he could think of anything else, he heard the woman scream out in pain. Mo Tienga hurriedly moved closer to take a look and couldn't help but be shocked. She saw that the man was firmly holding Little Sister Lien in his arms. His right hand was holding a dagger-like spirit tool, which was inserted into Little Sister Lien's back. The half-naked man and woman, the bloody dagger, the woman's frightened expression, and the man's distorted face. Mo Tienga covered her mouth and nose, not daring to breathe. It was obviously a lover's tryst, but she didn't expect it would turn into this. "Big Brother Ming, why?" The man snorted and sneered. "Do you think I'm really interested in you? It's just a honey trap." The woman widened her eyes. Hesitation, remorse, and anger intertwined in her eyes. Coupled with her distorted face due to pain, she looked even more frightening. Based on your looks, you're just SOSO, and you're also a quadruple spiritual root. Do you think I'll fall for you? It's just because you're the only successor of Huang clan's younger generation. After I kill you and get your family heirloom, the enchanting lantern, how could your Huang clan be an opponent for my clan? The woman's eyes showed understanding, and the despair in her eyes deepened. At this moment, she couldn't say anything. She just stared at her lover with widened eyes and gradually lost her breath. From these words, Mo Tienga managed to glean some information. Huang clan and En clan were both small cultivation clans relying on Yunwu sect. The two clans were said to have been enemies for generations. Presumably, En clan came up with this treacherous plan to eliminate Huang clan. After confirming the woman in his arms was no longer breathing, the man pulled out the dagger from her back and pushed Qi Yan's corpse away in disgust. He wiped the blood on the dagger and stood up to tidy his clothes. Tinga didn't dare to make a sound. This man was so treacherous that he killed his female companion when they were intimate. It was obvious he was an extremely evil person. If he found out, he definitely wouldn't let her go. After putting on his clothes, the man crouched down and rummaged through the woman's clothes. Finally, he found a chinquin bag. He easily broke the divine sense left by its master and poured out everything. There was a pile of women's clothes, spirit tools, talismans, jade bottles for storing elixirs, jade boxes that seemed to be used for storage, and so on. The man immediately saw what he was looking for. He picked up a lantern from among the spirit artifacts and said happily, "It really is here." Tinga was also very curious about this color glass lamp. She didn't know what kind of powerful function it had, but from what she saw, it seemed like an ordinary colored glass lamp. Aside from the spiritual aura it carried, she really couldn't see anything special about it. The man put everything back into the chinquin bag and put it away in his bosom. With a flick of his finger, a cluster of flames fell on the woman's corpse, immediately igniting a raging fire. The firelight shone on his rather handsome face, making him look gloomy and terrifying. Tinga only hoped that he would quickly destroy the corpse and erase the evidence so that she could escape. When she was 10 years old, she saw Yi Jingwen kill Li Yushan with a single sword strike. Later on, she followed second uncle to roam eastern Kunwu and often encountered dangerous situations. Second uncle never showed mercy to anyone who harbored evil intentions. But there had never been a time when she was so frightened. This man's killing methods were really too despicable. A moment ago, the two of them were still being affectionate, skin to skin, but in the next moment, he actually took advantage of their intimate moment to stab his lover in the back. Looking at the man's face under the fire, Tinga felt nauseous. It was clear that in the cultivation world, even feelings weren't reliable. This definitely wasn't the only case of lovers killing each other. All of a sudden, the corner of her eyes blurred. She reacted extremely quickly and dodged to the side. She saw a streak of flames rush past her original position and hit a shrub. Then, she heard the man's cold voice. "Oh, I've been discovered." Since things had reached this point, Tinga only needed to think for a moment before she took all the seeds in her chinquin bag. With his other hand, he used the wind breath technique on his palm. A wind blade shot out and sliced at a shrub not far away. The shrub swayed for a moment, and then a fiery light shot towards the shrub that was swaying. Taking advantage of the time when the man's attention was drawn, she moved slightly and floated several feet away in an instant. She stealthily peeked through the shrub and saw that the man was fiercely staring in the direction where she shot the spell. Fortunately, he didn't discover her hiding place. Tinga couldn't think of any way to escape. This man was obviously a vicious and merciless person. Her cultivation level was also the same as his, so it was impossible for her to escape without making a sound. She clenched her teeth. The only thing she could do now was to fight with her life on the line. Killing wasn't uncommon for her. In the past few years, she had followed second uncle and encountered many dangerous situations. However, second uncle had built his foundation many years ago, and Yi clan also had a rich collection, so second uncle's spells were powerful and his magic tool was also a high-grade one, so he didn't need her help. As for this man, he obviously wasn't a good person. It probably wasn't his first time killing people and robbing their treasures. Even though she practiced the art of Sinew and her spiritual power was much purer, she still didn't have the confidence to kill him. Since the man couldn't find her, he slowly walked towards the shrub. Fortunately, he wasn't heading in Tinga's direction. However, he would be able to find her after a short search. Tinga no longer hesitated. The moment he approached, she lightly flicked a seed towards him. In the forest, using things like seeds was indeed advantageous. She was also much more skilled in using spiritual aura compared to cultivators in the same realm as her. So she flicked the seed very lightly and was very difficult to detect. As soon as the man approached, the seed immediately expanded and turned into thorns, madly wrapping around the man's body. The man turned pale with fright and hastily brandished the spirit dagger in his hand. This dagger was presumably not an ordinary item. Before the thorns could wrap around the dagger, they were already cut into pieces. Since her hiding place was already exposed, Immerse took advantage of the man's confusion and immediately retreated. Soon after, she threw another handful of seeds at him. The man had already figured out her appearance. He glared at her fiercely, but he didn't dare to hesitate. He quickly retreated while using the dagger to cut down the plants that approached him. This attack method could be said to be a special feature of Yi Clan's greenwood art. Since she made her move, Immerse was determined to kill him. Otherwise, her identity would definitely be exposed. In this situation, it was either you die or I die. She clenched her teeth and took out the talismans she prepared for the Immortals' assembly. She slapped one of them on her body, and a defensive barrier immediately appeared and enveloped her. She then threw the other talismans at the man. The man was suddenly attacked. Immerse didn't give him a chance to catch his breath, so he couldn't fight back and could only defend. He had just obtained the enchanting lantern, so he hadn't removed the remnant divine sense on it to refine it for his own use. Since he couldn't use it, he was very anxious. Amidst the overwhelming number of talismans, Immerse waved a stack of talismans with seeds in them and threw them out. During this gap, the man only had time to cast a spell before he was once again stunned by Immerse's talismans. However, Immerse didn't dodge his spell at all. The defensive barrier on her body had already blocked it. She just kept throwing seeds and talismans at him. The man dodged and blocked the talismans. Just when he felt that there was something wrong with the talismans this time, he heard a bang. He had ignored the seed in the talisman, and it smashed into his hand. However, it suddenly grew into a ball and suddenly exploded. It directly blew up the defensive barrier on his body. At this moment, several more talismans flew towards him. With a blood-curdling scream, the man was sent flying backwards. Immerse immediately took out a wooden sword and swung it. The wooden sword directly pierced through the man's body. The man let out another groan. His heart was pierced through, and he no longer moved. After standing in a daze for a while, Immerse regained her composure and found that her head was full of cold sweat. This was the first time she killed someone with her own hands. Only now did she realize that her heart was beating like a drum and her steps were light. She couldn't help but laugh at herself. She couldn't kill people without blinking. It was obvious that she was still far from being a qualified cultivator. However, she was very happy to escape with her life. She wiped the sweat on her forehead and cautiously approached the man. After confirming that he was really dead, she retrieved the sword from his body and immediately started to destroy the corpse. She did what the man did just now. She retrieved the 2 chinquin bags from his body and burned the man's corpse with a snap of her fingers. This man just killed his lover and burned his corpse here. Now, he also died here in the same way. Immerse didn't know whether this was retribution or not. Now, the two of them could be said to be born in different worlds, but die in the same hole. After the corpse was completely burned and there were no traces left, Immerse hurriedly went back. They had a private meeting, so no one should know about it on the woman's side, but it might not necessarily be the case on the man's side. She cautiously made a big circle and hid for a while before going out from the other side. Chapter 32. Nothing unusual happened along the way, so Immerse returned to her rented courtyard and immediately went to Second Uncle's room. Yi Jiang was startled by her appearance. "Xiao Dian, what's wrong?" Immerse said in a trembling voice. "Second Uncle, I killed someone." Yi Jiang was startled, but he soon calmed down and said, "So be it. You have to get used to it. Otherwise, how can you continue on this path?" After he finished speaking, he asked worriedly, "Who did you kill? Did someone rob you?" "No." Immerse shook her head. Seeing how calm Second Uncle was, she also gradually calmed down and told him what happened just now. Yi Jiang frowned and thought for a moment before asking, "Did you leave any traces at the scene? Did anyone see you on your way back?" Immerse shook her head. "I cleaned it up. Even if someone found the place, they wouldn't find any clues. I circled around on my way back, but no one saw me. Yi Jiang calmed down. It's fine. They won't know you killed them if they can't find any clues. Besides, there's still second uncle. Although he's half dead, he's still a genuine foundation-building cultivator. The two clans you mentioned are only small clans. Even if they can't defeat them, they can always run away. Mo Tienga also calmed down after hearing someone comforting her. She then remembered the two men's Chinkoan bags and took them out. Second uncle, that man killed them for some enchanting lantern. I brought it back. Can you see what's so special about it? Unlike Mo Tienga, Yi Jiang frowned as soon as he saw the enchanting lantern. After a long time, he finally said, the enchanting lantern is indeed an ancestral treasure of the Huang clan. It's said to be a magic weapon. Once this lantern is summoned, a maze will appear within 100 feet radius. However, this lantern is a magic weapon, and magic weapons can only be used by core formation cultivators. Even if aura refining cultivators manage to use it, it won't be very powerful. Since the death of the Huang clan's core formation cultivator, no one has been able to use its full power. He then looked at her with a smile. Since you obtained it, it's also a fated chance. However, it's not appropriate to take it out for the time being. Put this enchanting lantern away and refine it in secret. Mo Tienga's original intention in killing that man wasn't to snatch his treasure. It was simply because all fights of magical powers were like this, and she also learned from them. Because of that, she didn't feel it was a pity. She just uttered a yes, then put the enchanting lantern away. Mo Tienga suddenly remembered something and asked, Second uncle, I was anxious today and used most of the talismans I had. The Immortals Assembly is next month. What should I do? Yi Jiang was also helpless as he said, it's your first time facing an enemy alone, so you really don't have any experience. That's why you panicked. 3 of them had the fire attribute, and 2 had the water attribute. Talismans weren't like spells. They weren't limited by spiritual roots and could be activated with just a little spiritual aura. Aura refining cultivators couldn't do without talismans in fights of magical power, but they were limited by their financial resources. Those who could use a lot of talismans were mostly disciples of cultivation groups or clans. Mo Tienga's talismans have been around for a long time. However, with these 5 high-grade talismans, the ones she lost weren't a big deal. She only used about 40 to 50 talismans, so these talismans were completely replenished. She then looked at the other things. There were several pretty good spirit tools, but they weren't comparable to the enchanting lantern. Moreover, they had to be refined before they could be used, and she was afraid they'd be recognized if she took them out. Besides, she already had a greenwood sword. Second uncle said it was once used by her father and was later refined again. She didn't need to change spirit tools before she reached the foundation building realm. After all, spirit tools had to be nourished and refined for a long time before they could be used easily. In addition, there were several bottles of various kinds of medicinal pills, all of which were commonly used by aura refining cultivators. What made Mo Tienga happy was that there was a bottle of aura nourishing pills. She happened to be short of medicinal pills. There was also a bottle of look-preserving pills. That woman probably spent a lot of money to buy them. One pill could preserve a person's youth for 10 years. However, Mo Tienga didn't need them. Not to mention, she was only 17 years old. The art of Sunu originally had the effect of preserving one's youth and could even make a woman more beautiful. There were also several jade boxes. They seemed to contain some kind of spiritual plants, but she didn't recognize them. Next, there were the man's belongings. They were mostly spirit tools, medicinal pills, talismans, and clothes. Obviously, the clan was better off than the Huang clan. Although they didn't have many talismans and they weren't high grade, their spirit tools and medicinal pills were much better than the woman's. There was even a bottle of aura-converging pills. Aura-converging pills were the best medicinal pills for aura-refining cultivators to consolidate their foundation and nourish their primordial aura. Their effects were several times better than aura-nourishing pills. Ordinary aura refining cultivators wouldn't be able to afford them unless they were proud disciples of cultivation group or had a high-level cultivator as an elder. Tinga happily put away her belongings. Suddenly, she discovered a large bead among them. It looked like a pearl that contained spiritual aura. She tried to inject spiritual aura into it, but it was completely different from her spirit-gathering bead. There seemed to be a layer of something that isolated spiritual aura from the outside, making it impossible for her to inject it. In any case, she already had enough things today, so she didn't mind. She put the useless clothes into a chinquin bag and the useful ones into her own chinquin bag. After tossing and turning, she was really hungry. The rabbit and wild vegetables she hunted yesterday were still there, so she moved the pots and bowls from the corner of the room. She scooped some water from the water jar outside and washed the pots and bowls. She also cleaned the rabbit, wild vegetables, and mushrooms before stewing them in one pot. Of course, this stewing wasn't the method of stewing in the mortal world. She used magic. When she was a child, she cooked for herself. Later, when she lived in the ancestral house, she often took advantage of the fact that Aunt Lynn wasn't around to secretly cook for her in the middle of the night. Therefore, after she found out spiritual beasts could be eaten, she decided to cook for herself. At first, Second Uncle didn't approve of her cooking. He believed that cultivators shouldn't be greedy for good food. However, after he tasted it himself, he discovered that the impurities it added were negligible, so he let her do as she pleased. After a while, Tinga gave half of the pot to Second Uncle. After eating and drinking to her heart's content, she still felt somewhat restless, so she decided to go out and scout around. Chapter 33. Tinga went to the place where she usually set up her stall. Sure enough, she saw Taoist Huang there and greeted him, Uncle Huang. Taoist Huang was very happy to see her. Xiaodian, I haven't seen you for several days. Why didn't you come out to set up your stall? Tinga said, It's because of the Immortals' assembly, so I probably won't come out for a while. Taoist Huang nodded in understanding. You're right. This is a big deal. Hey, how are your preparations? It's the same. For individual cultivators like us, we never have enough things. Her words made Taoist Huang sigh. Yes, we can't compare to the children of cultivation clans. We can ignore other chores and focus on cultivation. We can't lack spirit tools, talismans, and spirit stones. Tinga was silent when it came to this topic. If her father hadn't met with an accident and Second Uncle hadn't been forced to give up the clan, she probably wouldn't have to spend so much time on chores. Taoist Huang comforted her. Xiaodian, if you lack talismans, I'll give you a discount. If you don't have enough spirit stones, it's okay. You can take them first. Tinga was rather moved by his words. In fact, she didn't have a deep friendship with Uncle Huang. They just talked a lot because they had been doing small business together for the past 2 years. Uncle Huang's spiritual roots weren't good, and his cultivation level was only in the 8th layer of the aura refining realm. He was getting older and had no hope of advancing, so he spent most of his time doing business, hoping to save some spirit stones for his descendants. They were all struggling young aura-refining cultivators in the cultivation world, and none of them had it better than the other. It was really rare that Uncle Huang was willing to help them in this situation. No need, Uncle Huang. You can't earn much by selling talismans, so how can I take advantage of you? Besides, individual cultivators like us don't live like this. We have much more fighting experience than the children of those aristocratic clans. Tinga said this with a bit of a guilty conscience. Although she was also an individual cultivator, she had a foundation-building elder, so she didn't have much fighting experience. However, Second Uncle would tell her a lot about his experience. Taoist Huang nodded in agreement. Yes, although the children of those aristocratic clans have their elders to guide them, they can't understand fighting with just a few words. Tinga felt even more guilty. Remembering her purpose of coming out, she hurriedly changed the topic. By the way, Uncle Huang, I haven't been out for 2 days. Is there any news? News? Taoist Huang thought for a moment and said, Oh, it's news from the Immortals' Assembly, right? Recently, There are more and more people coming here. Look at the street. There are many young cultivators. I guess they are here to participate in the Immortals' assembly. Only now did Mo Tienga notice that there were indeed a few more people here compared to 2 days ago. The closer the Immortals' assembly was, the more people would come. Many individual cultivators who failed to be selected by other cultivation groups would also come to try their luck. In addition, there were also cultivator clans from various regions, so the number of people who came from outside was actually much higher than before. Sigh. More people means more disputes. Yesterday, Mo Tinga heard that the life lanterns of the most promising juniors from Huang clan and In clan, which were both dependent on Yunwu's sect, had been extinguished. Furthermore, their corpses couldn't be found. Now, both clans were blaming each other for their deaths. Little Tian, you also have to be careful. There might be people with bad intentions. Mo Tienga was startled. As it turned out, this matter was already exposed. On the surface, however, he pretended to be very surprised. Really? Daoist Huang didn't notice her abnormality. He just shook his head and said with a sigh, "This kind of thing is too normal. Every time the Immortals' assembly approaches, it's not only the competing cultivation clans, but also many individual cultivators who encounter this kind of thing. Although we cultivators preach Dao hard, inner demons are something that can only be encountered when one advances to the gold core formation realm. How could these people have the time to care about something that doesn't even exist?" Mo Tienga felt a bit relieved. It was fine as long as she wasn't suspected. When she saw someone stopping in front of her stall, she smiled and said, "Uncle Huang, you can continue with your business. I'm going to buy some things and prepare." "Okay, go ahead," Daoist Huang answered and promptly went to greet the customer. The Immortals' assembly was a good opportunity to make money. Mo Tienga left the stall with a heavy expression. She carefully recalled everything again to make sure she didn't leave any clues behind and that no one saw her leave. Although she rationally believed she was safe, she still couldn't help but feel a bit anxious in her heart. In the end, she still wasn't calm enough. She told herself over and over again to calm down a bit. Although she came out to inquire about information, she still had other things to do. Once she calmed down, she went to the biggest shop on Mount Yunwu. Although it wasn't a big cultivation group like Xianxing School, the goods in Yunwu's sec shop were quite complete. Basically, anything could be bought. Mo Tienga didn't waste any time and directly asked the shop assistant, "Do you have 20 restorative panaceas?" She was also a regular customer here and often came to buy medicinal pills, so the shop assistant was very enthusiastic. He said, "Yes, yes, yes. Fellow Daoist, please wait a moment." He then turned around and took out a relatively large jade bottle from the counter. He carefully counted 20 pills and put them into a small jade bottle before handing it to her. "Fellow Daoist, take a look. Is there any problem?" He was counting them in front of her, and the quality of the medicinal pills was also pretty good. Mo Tienga nodded, took the medicinal pills, and paid the spirit stones. Although the man and woman from yesterday didn't have a lot of spirit stones, it was enough for her to buy these. Speaking of which, robbery was indeed a good profession. The two of them, uncle and nephew, might as well kill 2 aura refining cultivators by accident while working hard. Of course, it was just a thought. If she was like those people who only cared about a moment of pleasure and didn't care about the consequences of not being able to form her gold core, she definitely wouldn't be so short-sighted. After buying the medicinal pills, Mo Tienga didn't linger and walked out of the shop. She didn't need magic tools, and she really didn't have any extra spirit stones to buy talismans. After thinking about it, what she lacked the most was still restorative panaceas. The competition at the Immortals' assembly was fierce. If she encountered a strong enemy, her spiritual aura would definitely be depleted. At that time, it would be a competition to see who had more restorative panaceas and spirit stones. Although spirit stones could also replenish spiritual aura, their effects weren't as good as restorative panaceas. Elixirs were too important for cultivation. Most of the spirit stones that the uncle and nephew earned were spent on elixirs. Mo Tienga once thought about learning pill concocting, but second uncle vetoed her. Second uncle said concocting pills, refining tools, formations, and talismans, no matter which one it was, required a lot of effort. As an aura refining cultivator, spending most of her time on these things wasn't worth it, except for cultivators who had no hope of building their foundation. Besides, since she was so talented in formations, she really didn't need to learn pill concocting. It was really difficult to train a concocting master. Even small cultivation clans couldn't afford to provide for one, let alone them. Tinga really wasn't sure whether she had the talent for pill concocting. Second uncle said Yi clan members were all good at formations, but there were very few who were good at pill concocting. Thinking that it was more likely that she didn't have the talent, she gave up on this idea. After returning to her residence, she went to second uncle's room first. Second uncle, Yi Jiang, who was still healing his injuries, opened his eyes and asked, "How is it?" "What do you mean, how?" Yi Jiang stared at her and shook his head. "Didn't you go out early in the morning to gather information?" Tinga stuck out her tongue. "Second uncle, you're really a roundworm in my stomach." Yi Jiang glanced at her and said with a humph, "Impudent." She smiled and moved closer to him. Second uncle, Uncle Huang, said the two clans already found out about the deaths, but they're blaming each other. They said it was the other party's doing, and they didn't find anything. Yi Jiang nodded. "That's good. Even if they find out it wasn't the other party's doing, it'll be hard for them to trace it back to you. Now that the Immortals' Assembly is approaching, Mount Yunwu is filled with crooks and honest folk. They won't be able to find anything." His words were exactly the same as Uncle Huang's. Sure enough, the older the ginger, the spicier. Recalling yesterday's harvest, she became excited and said, "Second uncle, I checked yesterday. Although they didn't have many talismans, there were 5 high-grade talismans among them. It could be said that I made a profit. There were also a lot of medicinal pills, including a bottle of aura-converging pills. Today, I also used their spirit stones to buy restorative panaceas, so I don't lack anything." "Oh, that's good news." Yi Jiang originally thought the two of them didn't have many spirit stones and talismans on them, but now it seemed the 5 high-grade talismans made up for the loss. That being the case, you don't need to waste your spirit stones anymore. Second uncle will teach you how to transform the spirit trapping formation. In the next few days, you'll have a better chance of success. And she nodded vigorously. Yi Jiang smiled. He stroked her head and handed her a jade slip. "This is the method to lay the formation. Go and study it. Come back tomorrow and tell me how much you've comprehended." Chapter 34. A month passed in the blink of an eye. During this month, Tinga focused on cultivating and comprehending formations. Occasionally, she came out to check on the situation. The matter between Clan and Huang clan was done by the other party. The deeper they investigated, the more they found out about the illicit relationship between the two clans. They all accused the other party of instigating the younger generation to seduce them. Since they couldn't solve the problem, they had to fight privately. As a result, both clans suffered losses and their clans declined. More than 10 years later, the remaining cultivators of the two clans died one after another and were removed from Mount Yunwu. Of course, this was a story for later. Right now, as long as they didn't find out anything about her, Tinga didn't care about them. These two clans were originally dogs biting each other and didn't want to let go of this opportunity to make things difficult for each other. She had a more important thing now. The Immortals' Assembly on Mount Yunwu was about to begin. At this time, the number of cultivators on Mount Yunwu was several times more than usual. One reason was that more people came to participate in the Immortals' Assembly, and the other reason was that most of the participants had companions, friends, or elders. Early in the morning, Tinga got up. At the same time, Yi Jiang also stopped recuperating, packed up his belongings, and went with her. This was the tradition of the Immortals' Assembly. Because the Immortals' Assembly was a competition of life and death, the participants would be accompanied by their relatives and friends. If they really died, their belongings would be taken back by their relatives and friends. If they didn't, the belongings would belong to the sect. The uncle and nephew duo flew along the mountain road to the mountain where Yunwu sect was located. They first went to register with the gatekeeper and got their identity tablets before they could enter with second uncle. Seeing that Yi Jiang was in the foundation building realm, the young gatekeeper took a second look at him. It was naturally much easier for foundation building cultivators to join a sect, and it was also very easy for them to bring their nephews and disciples into the sect. Therefore, there were only a few foundation building cultivators accompanying them to the Immortals' assembly. However, seeing that Yi Jiang didn't have much lifespan left, the disciple looked away. First, the sect didn't want to accept foundation building cultivators who were about to die and had no hope of advancing. Second, those foundation building cultivators didn't want to be restricted by the sect when they were about to die. This wasn't strange at all. Today, Yunwu sect was like a Taoist temple in the secular world. The mountain road was full of people. Mo Tienga estimated that there were probably thousands of people. Of the 1,000 or so people, even if half of them wanted to go up on stage, there would still be over 1,000 people. However, the sect only recruited a few dozen people. It was clear how intense the competition was. After entering the Yunwu Mountain Gate, there was a large square. It occupied a large area and could accommodate 10,000 people. Behind the square was a magnificent hall surrounded by clouds and mist. It gave off the feeling of a celestial sect. At this moment, 10 arenas had already been set up on the square. Each arena was guarded by several foundation building cultivators. There were also aura refining cultivators registering. The rule of this arena was that if you won more than 10 people in the arena, you would advance to the next round. In the next round of competition, you would still have to win more people until there were only a few dozen people left. Second uncle had told her that it wasn't easy to fight from the beginning to the end. In the beginning, there would always be people who wanted to obtain the qualification as soon as possible, and the experts hadn't even gone on stage yet. In the end, there would be many people who had lost in other arenas. In order to fight for the last chance, they would even fight with their lives on the line. More than half of the casualties would happen at the last moment. Therefore, she decided to enter the arena at about the middle of the battle. This way, she could avoid the front and back of the battle, and it should be easier for her to meet people who were fighting with their lives on the line. When the sun rose, several summoning talismans flew out of the hall and fell directly into the hands of the cultivators guarding the arenas. After these cultivators received the summoning talismans, they announced the start of the competition on their respective arenas. Each arena was a separate competition, and everyone could fight once. Therefore, many people would first enter arena at the beginning of the competition. If they couldn't win, they would pick a weaker arena and fight again. However, this method was rarely successful because talismans, spirit stones, and the like would be used up. Individual cultivators didn't have enough wealth to spend like this. Even if they did, they would inevitably suffer some injuries in the process, so it would be much harder to fight than the first time. Mo Tienga and Mo Tienga casually guarded an arena to watch. Soon, they saw someone enter the arena. It was a strong man in the 9th layer of the aura refining realm in his 30s. According to the rules of the Immortals' Assembly, only those under the age of 50 could register. Because it was very difficult for cultivators to advance after the age of 50, most of the people present were in their 30s or 40s. There weren't many young people like Mo Tienga who hadn't reached 20 yet. The strong man handed over his identity tablet to the cultivator in charge of registration, then raised his voice and said, "Which fellow Taoist wants to come up and give me some pointers?" His voice was as loud as a bell, so the people below the arena could hear him clearly. Seeing that there was already a 9th layer aura refining cultivator at the beginning of the competition, the cultivators surrounding the arena sighed one after another. The 10th layer was the highest level of the aura refining realm. How could the 6th or 7th layer aura refining cultivators not feel helpless when there was already such a high-level person at the beginning? However, there were naturally some people who didn't want to let this go. Sure enough, someone came to the arena. He first handed over his identity tablet, then greeted the strong man. "Brother, I'm here to ask for your guidance." The two of them exchanged some pleasantries before they each took out their spirit tools and began to fight. Yi Jiang shook his head and said, "Let's go to the other arenas." Mo Tinga didn't have any objections. The fighting methods of the two cultivators in this arena were very ordinary. Her cultivation level was slightly lower, but relying on her handy greenwood sword and greenwood art, it wasn't difficult for her to win. The second arena was actually a battle of talismans between two people. Mo Tinga didn't know where these two people came from, but they were actually throwing talismans at each other as if they were free. They were even crazier than when she killed the cultivator from a clan. Mo Tinga thought about it. She really couldn't think of any other way to deal with such an opponent other than throwing talismans like the other party. Spirit tools couldn't be as fast as talismans, and spells also consumed spiritual aura, so the person with more talismans would definitely win. The last few arenas were very ordinary. Yi Jiang couldn't help but exclaim in surprise when he saw one of the arenas. Mo Tinga was curious. "What's wrong, second uncle?" Yi Jiang watched for a while before he finally shook his head. "This cultivator's spiritual aura is very skillful. Presumably, he either has an elder or is someone with a firm will." Mo Tinga looked at the arena. It was a fight between a middle-aged man in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm in his 40s and a young man in the 9th layer of the aura refining realm in his early 20s. The middle-aged cultivator had a fan-shaped spirit tool, while the young man only had a defensive talisman on his body. However, the young man's spells were fast and accurate, so the middle-aged cultivator was in a difficult situation. Presumably, second uncle was talking about this young man. Mo Tinga watched for a long time, but still couldn't figure anything out, so she said, "This person only practices spells very well." Yi Jiang smiled and shook his head. "This person's spells are very ordinary, but the circulation of his spiritual aura is very fast. Look at the time he attacks. He practically doesn't need to prepare before he casts spells one after another. Ordinary aura refining cultivators need a long time to circulate their spiritual aura before casting spells, and it's precisely because of this that talismans are faster than spells. But look at him. He's not much slower than talismans. This is the limit that aura refining cultivators can reach." Mo Tinga took a closer look. Sure enough, that was the case. This person cast spells as if he was casting talismans. One after another, his opponent couldn't parry them. To be able to practice this skill, it's either because of an elder's guidance or because he deliberately practiced the circulation of his spiritual aura. Moreover, he spent a lot of effort on it. To be able to spend so much effort on these seemingly useless things, and for such a long time, it's obvious that he's a person with a firm will. Mo Tinga felt great admiration. Not only did she admire this person's willpower, but she also admired second uncle's keen eyesight. Just by looking at the speed at which this young man cast spells, he was able to infer this person's temperament. The uncle and nephew duo looked around before they finally chose a place. Yi Jiang said, "This place is fine. You'll go next." Mo Tinga responded with a yes and focused her attention on the fight in the ring. What was rare was that the two cultivators in the ring both looked like youths in their 20s. Moreover, both of them were in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm. One of them was using a flying sword while the other was using a whip. The flying sword was a high-grade spirit tool, and the young man using the sword also seemed to have a very pure spiritual aura. Gradually, the young man using the whip could only parry. Because the whip was only a middle-grade spirit tool, it simply didn't dare to come into contact with the flying sword and could only dodge. Before it could, the young man had no choice but to concede. Upon hearing the foundation building cultivator at the side of the ring announcing the winner, the young man using the flying sword cupped his hands complacently and looked at the crowd below the ring. Yi Jiang said go. Mo Tinga nodded and leaped onto the ring. She first greeted the foundation building cultivator at the side, then handed over her identity tablet. After the foundation building cultivator confirmed that there were no problems, she cupped her hands towards the young man and said, "I'm Yi Xiaotian. Please enlighten me, brother." Chapter 35. Seeing that Mo Tienga didn't even look at him before she saluted the referee, as if she didn't take him seriously at all, the youth in the arena was very displeased. He let out a humph and directly released his flying sword without returning the greeting. Mo Tienga was already prepared. She took out her greenwood sword and began to fight. Although greenwood sword was a wooden sword, it had been repaired by a high-level cultivator and was also a high-level spirit tool. Moreover, it matched her greenwood art, so it wasn't inferior to the opponent's flying sword. Thus, they fought back and forth. Seeing that the youth was focused on controlling his flying sword, Mo Tienga secretly took out a handful of seeds from her Chinquan bag. To qualify, she had to win 10 matches in a row. Although she could eat restorative panaceas, no one could predict what kind of difficult opponent she would encounter. Therefore, it was best to finish the match quickly to save spiritual aura. Therefore, Mo Tienga didn't intend to win slowly. She only probed the youth's strength and made a decision. She once again controlled her greenwood sword to meet the opponent's flying sword. In the next moment, she raised her left hand and 3 seeds flew towards the opponent. The opponent soon felt something was wrong. In his hurry, he didn't dare to take the seeds head-on and could only dodge. However, Mo Tienga once again shot 3 seeds. This time, he only managed to tilt his head while the other 2 seeds hit his body. A ball instantly grew out of the one on his body, and then it exploded his protective barrier. The one below immediately grew into thorns and firmly entangled his legs. The youth turned pale with fright and hurriedly commanded his flying sword to cut off the thorns. He then took out a talisman from his robe and threw it at Mo Tienga to stall her greenwood sword. Mo Tienga didn't block the talisman. Instead, she leaped up and retrieved her greenwood sword. She dodged the talisman and instantly rushed over with her sword. Before the young man had time to move, the greenwood sword shook off his flying sword and pointed at his chest. The youth didn't dare to move because Mo Tienga already had a talisman in her other hand. He believed that as soon as he moved, the talisman would be thrown out. He had no choice but to reluctantly say, "I admit defeat." Mo Tienga smiled and retrieved her greenwood sword. A few years ago, when she wandered around with Second Uncle, she discovered that cultivators relied too much on spirit tools and talismans in fights of magical powers, but they weren't good at martial arts. Therefore, on the basis of her light body technique, she fused it with secular martial arts. In this way, her reaction speed would be faster than others. That day when he killed the man from the family in the forest, the reason why he was able to gain the upper hand was also because his reaction was faster than that man's. It was relatively easy for her to defeat this young man because Second Uncle had always asked her to practice the use of spiritual aura. Moreover, her spirit tool was also of high quality, so her chances of winning against someone of the same cultivation level or even 1 or 2 layers higher than her were quite high. After all, it wasn't like that day when she had to save her own life. Today, with Second Uncle below her, her life wasn't in danger, so she could face the enemy calmly. Of course, if the opponent was a level 10 Chi training cultivator or a level 9 Chi training cultivator, it would be difficult to win. The second person who came up was also a cultivator in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm like her. Mo Tienga didn't have to spend too much effort to win. However, after that, no more 7th layer Chi refining cultivators came up, only 8th and 9th layer Chi refining cultivators. In the beginning, Mo Tienga had an easy time, but after winning 5 or 6 battles, she started to feel a bit strenuous. The last few battles were basically won by relying on the greenwood sword, which was superior to ordinary high-grade spirit tools. Usually, their spiritual aura was almost exhausted after they finished fighting. Yunwu sect also had a rule that stated the winner could meditate for a while, but not for too long. Therefore, they had to rely on spirit stones to recover their spiritual aura. Fortunately, Mo Tienga had prepared enough spirit stones, so she was able to recover her spiritual aura every time. However, after fighting 5 or 6 battles in a row, she still felt tired. This was mental exhaustion. Even though she had abundant spiritual aura, it didn't help her. Nevertheless, Her winning streak had attracted the attention of the spectators in the surroundings. There were many 7th-layer Chi refining cultivators participating in the Immortals Assembly, but most of them were 9th or 10th-layer cultivators. It was very rare for someone to win against 4 cultivators whose cultivation level was higher than theirs in a row. At present, aside from this arena, there wasn't a single arena guarded by a 7th-layer Chi refining cultivator. Moreover, the spell she used was indeed different from the others. Seeds sprouted in an instant and only attacked when they were in front of the enemy. It was much more powerful than ordinary wood element spells. Ordinary wood element spells used spiritual aura to create plants, so they certainly consumed more spiritual aura than seeds. Seeds flying in the sky were really difficult to defend against. She used a high-grade talisman and barely managed to defeat an 8th-layer Chi refining cultivator. However, the next challenger made Tinga feel very powerless. It was a 10th-layer Chi refining cultivator. If 8th and 9th-layer Chi refining cultivators had a 50-50 chance of winning, then 10th-layer Chi refining cultivators were obviously at a disadvantage. Nevertheless, she instantly made up her mind. That being the case, she'd fight with talismans and spiritual panaceas. After the two of them greeted each other, Tinga immediately took out her greenwood sword and patted a defensive talisman on her body. This cultivator was a middle-aged man. Obviously, he was very experienced in fights of magical powers. He calmly took out his spirit tool, which was actually a small flag, and it floated in front of him. All flag-type spirit tools were either defensive or spirit-controlling, so they weren't easy to deal with. Tinga was a bit cautious. She controlled her greenwood sword and threw the talisman and the seeds in her hand at the same time towards the middle-aged cultivator. However, she saw that the middle-aged cultivator wasn't anxious at all. He waved a small flag and unexpectedly released spiritual aura to attract all the attacks. Moreover, the flag wasn't damaged at all under the attacks. Tinga frowned. Apparently, this flag was a defensive treasure. This was going to be troublesome. Her opponent's cultivation level was higher than hers, so his attacks would be very strenuous for her. Her plan was to make the first move and gain the upper hand. If she managed to injure her opponent, it would be much easier to deal with him. However, her opponent had this kind of spirit tool. She still threw a lot of seeds, but she didn't use the talismans anymore. If she didn't use them and wasted the talismans, it wouldn't be easy for her to continue fighting. While receiving her attacks, her opponent shot a fireball at her. Fire elemental magic was the most powerful magic among the 5 elements. As long as a cultivator had a fire elemental spiritual root, he or she would most likely cultivate fire elemental magic. Tinga didn't dare to underestimate him. She immediately used the light body technique to dodge to the side, but she found that it wasn't difficult to dodge the fireball. She was pleasantly surprised. It seemed her opponent was good at defense and not offense, so she still had a chance to win. Fortunately, she only used ordinary thorn grass and cactus. The seeds didn't cost much, so she just threw them as if they didn't cost anything. Tinga was a bit anxious because her attacks didn't work. If this went on, it would definitely be disadvantageous for her because she had been fighting for too long and was mentally exhausted to a certain extent. Although her opponent wasn't good at attacking, she still found it more and more difficult to dodge. Moreover, as long as her opponent raised the flag, he didn't need to use any defensive methods. It could be said that as long as he completely defended against her attacks, he would be in an invincible position because she would definitely make a mistake before him. No, she must change this situation to have a chance to win. She held a handful of seeds in her hand and threw more than 10 seeds at the same time. The middle-aged cultivator was still pouring spiritual aura into the small flag. He didn't notice that some of the seeds didn't fly at him, but fell in other directions. Tinga patiently dodged the spells and threw the seeds. Finally, she threw all the seeds in the direction she wanted. She stopped, gathered the spiritual aura in her palms, and suddenly pressed them down. Around the ring, several thistles and vines suddenly grew and surrounded the middle-aged cultivator. The middle-aged cultivator was shocked because he found these thistles and vines were circling around him. As they circled around, the scene in front of him gradually blurred. Soon, even the thistles and vines disappeared. His surroundings became hazy. He couldn't see anything except himself. He looked around and raised his vigilance. Deep in his heart, there was a bit of fear. He originally didn't take this seventh layer aura refining boy seriously, but this move was obviously a formation. This was a field he was completely unfamiliar with. Suddenly, spells were thrown at him. He used the flag to block them one by one, but the attacks were endless. He couldn't relax. Eventually, his spiritual aura was slowly exhausted, and the restorative panacea couldn't hold on for much longer. Outside the formation, Tienga didn't attack. Instead, she threw several spirit stones to control the formation. She rested for a while and waited for her opponent's spiritual aura to run out. Fortunately, her opponent wasn't proficient in formations and hadn't moved from his position. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult for her to lay a formation in the middle of a fight. Finally, seeing that her opponent was getting more and more tired, she took out a high-level water talisman and threw it at him. Water came up from the middle-aged cultivator's feet. Tienga threw another ordinary earth element spell, causing quicksand to appear under the cultivator's feet. The things under his feet weren't easy to detect. Moreover, it was already very strenuous for this cultivator to use the small flag. When the quicksand appeared, the water had already trapped him. He wanted to use the flag to break this spell, but he discovered that he didn't have enough spiritual aura. Tienga took out her greenwood sword and stabbed it towards that cultivator. Chapter 36. When the greenwood sword appeared in front of him, the middle-aged cultivator had no choice but to move the small flag to block the tip of the sword. However, the quicksand and water under his feet surged up even faster. Tienga didn't stop and threw another talisman at him. With a loud sound, the cultivator fell down in the ring. At this time, the foundation-building cultivator, who was the referee, walked forward and examined the cultivator. He then stood up and nodded. Yi Xiaotian wins. Tienga relaxed. Seeing second uncle's gratified smile, she hastily sat down to recover her spiritual aura. In order to consume her opponent's spiritual aura, she also took a restorative panacea. It wasn't easy for her to hold on, so she was really exhausted. Without the support of her spiritual aura, the formation lost its effectiveness. The thistles and thorns withered one after another. When the middle-aged cultivator finally saw the outside of the formation, he stood up with a pale face and jumped off the ring. The defense of his flag was really amazing. Tienga used all her strength, but still didn't cause him any serious injuries. However, losing to his seventh layer aura refining cultivator was probably a big blow to his confidence. Moreover, if he lost this round, he could only fight in another ring. The injuries he suffered and the medicine he took this time would affect his performance in the next round, so it would be much more difficult for him to win. Tienga also didn't feel good. This was the 8th round. She still had to defeat 2 people to qualify for the next round. However, she was really too tired now. If another opponent like the middle-aged cultivator came, it would be very difficult for her to hold on. However, with her cultivation level, it would be very difficult for her to defeat 10 people if she had to fight against a bunch of 9th and 10th layer opponents who were just as eager to win. Besides, she was almost exhausted now. She also used talismans, medicinal pills, and spirit stones, so she almost couldn't fight in the next ring. Therefore, she could only fight with all her strength. In any case, second uncle was here. As long as she didn't court death, her life wouldn't be in danger. Unfortunately, if she was from a cultivation clan, she would send a disciple of her clan to fight in the ring. That way, there would be a total of 10 people, unlike now, where she could only fight recklessly. However, when she recovered her spiritual aura, she found that no one had entered the ring yet. The referee shouted again, "Those who want to fight, please come up quickly. If no one comes up within a quarter of an hour, the ring master will directly win." After a while, someone finally came up. He was a 7th layer chi refinement cultivator. Imo Tinga was baffled. Generally speaking, the opponents in the competition would become stronger and stronger. After watching the previous fights of magical powers, people who didn't have some skill wouldn't dare to step onto the stage. Only those who had a way to deal with their opponents would step onto the stage. Could it be that this 7th layer aura refining cultivator, who was also like her, had something special about him? Raising his spirit, he began to fight. However, this cultivator was very ordinary. He used the verdant wood art, and after a short while, the cultivator admitted defeat. Imo Tinga was greatly puzzled. Why did it seem like this cultivator was trying to make up the numbers for her? What she didn't know was that the battle with the 10th layer aura refining cultivator had already made everyone afraid to go on stage again. Defeating a 10th layer chi refining 7th layer cultivator was definitely more revered than defeating a 10th layer cultivator. This was because it wasn't rare for a 10th layer cultivator to defeat a cultivator of the same level, but defeating a 7th layer cultivator was rare, and all of them were difficult to deal with. Moreover, everyone could see that the other party was proficient in formations. Most people were helpless against him. Needless to say, those who weren't sure they could defeat her were afraid of exhausting their spiritual aura like the other cultivator, which would affect the following fights. In any case, it hadn't been long since the competition started, so it didn't matter if she was a bit late. Therefore, almost everyone tacitly agreed to let her win this round, so they could start the next one as soon as possible. After watching so many fights, the cultivator who stepped onto the stage realized he had almost no hope of winning, so he came up to experience her strength. He wanted to use this as a goal and come back next time. This time, it took a long time for one person to step onto the stage. His cultivation level was even worse, only in the 6th layer. Soon, he lost to her and left the stage. The referee, a foundation-building cultivator, called her to the side and handed her the identity tablet. He had already marked it and told her to come back after the fight was over. Then he announced the next round. Imo Tinga was ecstatic. She walked down the stage unsteadily and almost fell. Fortunately, Yi Jiang stepped forward and supported her. "Second uncle, I succeeded." Yi Jiang smiled and helped her out of the crowd. He said, "Rest for a while. It's good that you've won." Imo Tinga nodded, then sat cross-legged to adjust her breath until her spiritual aura recovered. After she stopped to adjust her breath, she opened her eyes and looked at second uncle with joy. "Second uncle, I really succeeded, right?" Yi Jiang nodded with a smile. "You really succeeded. If you concentrate on fighting, you'll naturally succeed." This wasn't to comfort her. She just didn't have much experience in life and death fights, but she wasn't weak in this kind of competition. Imo Tinga then looked worried. This is only the first round of the competition, but it's already so difficult. What about the next round? Thinking up to this point, Yi Jiang also sighed. "If you can't succeed, then forget it. We won't force you." Indeed, she was already lucky to win. In the next round, none of the opponents would be easy to deal with. Even if she won against one, it would be difficult for her to win against two. The uncle and nephew duo comforted each other, then cheered up and went to watch the competition. While Imo Tinga was resting, the winners of each ring appeared one after another. Most of them were 9th and 10th layer cultivators. There was only one 8th layer cultivator and another 7th layer cultivator. According to others' discussions, the other 7th layer cultivator was a young man in his 20s who seemed to be a disciple of a cultivation clan. He had a magic weapon in his hand, and no one could match him. So he smoothly won against 10 people. It was already afternoon, and the fights in the rings were getting more and more intense. Most of the people had already entered the rings, and now, some of them were fighting with their lives on the line. Injuries occurred frequently, and the injuries were getting more and more serious. The more Imo Tinga watched, the more she couldn't bear to watch. This was the first time she participated in the Immortals Assembly. Although she was mentally prepared, she still didn't expect it to be this tragic. She couldn't help but feel sad. The path to immortality was uncertain, and individual cultivators were even more difficult. For a little bit of hope, they were willing to risk their lives. This path was really sad. Finally, at sunset, Everyone finished their competition, and the referees announced the end of the competition. In this Immortals assembly, 2 people died from serious injuries, and countless people were injured. Mo Tienga heaved a sigh of relief and went forward with the other victors. The foundation-building cultivators from each of the 10 rings gathered together. They swept their gazes over the victors one by one, frowning and discussing something. This made them restless. They didn't know what was dissatisfied with them. Mo Tienga couldn't help but sweep her gaze over them, but she didn't find anything wrong. There were only about 20 victors, and half of them were injured. Among them, there were only 4 women, and half of them were young men. That was probably because those who could reach this level of cultivation in their 20s were usually the descendants of cultivation clans, so their chances of winning were naturally high. Mo Tienga didn't know what these foundation-building cultivators were discussing, but soon, the leader of the group sent a summoning talisman into the main hall. After a while, the summoning talisman flew back. The leader took it, and several people gathered together to listen. After a short discussion, they stood up and faced the others. Obviously, they were going to announce the next round. Mo Tienga couldn't help but feel a bit nervous, worried that something might happen. The leader was a foundation-building cultivator with half-white hair and a beard. He swept his solemn gaze over them and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, only 24 people won in the first round of the Immortals Assembly. Because of this, the sect head ordered that there's no need to continue the competition and that all 24 people will be accepted into the sect. You can go back and deal with your affairs first. Tomorrow, at the hour of the 11th hour, report to the sect." Everyone was in an uproar. They were both surprised and happy. Mo Tienga was even more so. She was originally worried she wouldn't be able to pass the second round, but she never expected there would be such a change this time. She was immediately overjoyed. She could directly enter Yunwu's sect. Chapter 37. Second uncle won't be by your side when you go up the mountain this time, so you have to be careful. That spirit-concealing jade pendant must never leave your body, and you mustn't reveal your female appearance in front of others unless you form your gold core one day and have the power to protect yourself. If you have any difficulties with your cultivation, come down the mountain and ask second uncle. Don't fight with your fellow disciples, understand? Mo Tienga nodded with a reluctant expression. Second uncle, you have to be careful when you're alone at the foot of the mountain. If anything happens, send me a message, and I'll come down the mountain immediately. Yi Jiang nodded and comforted her. Rest assured, this market square belongs to Yunwu's sect, so there won't be any danger here. Besides, second uncle is a foundation-building cultivator after all, so no one will provoke me. You also shouldn't go down the mountain too often. It's not good if people see you. Once a month is enough. But, Mo Tienga hesitated. If I'm not here, what about second uncle's medicinal pills? Yi Jiang smiled. Since you're already a Yunwu sect disciple, Yunwu sect shops can sell things for you. When the time comes, you can go to second uncle's shop to get the formations and sell them for spirit stones. This was actually a good thing. As it turned out, they were only individual cultivators. Yunwu sect shops sold their things at a very low price. Moreover, the shopkeeper didn't know what was good and refused to pay a high price for their formations. It wouldn't be a problem if they sold things for him. Mo Tienga was delighted. And, second uncle, wait for me to build my foundation. At that time, I can have my own immortal's cave, and we could be together. Yi Jiang nodded with a smile. Second uncle will wait for you. It's almost the hour of the 7th now. You should go quickly. And I'm leaving. I'll come back to see you after a while. After packing her luggage, Mo Tienga used the light body technique and leaped towards the gate of Yunwu's sect. Yi Jiang sighed faintly as he stared at her back. When she arrived at the gate, Mo Tienga saw disciples guarding the gate. She walked forward with a smile, saluted them, and asked, "Senior Marshal Brothers, I came to report today. May I know where I'm going?" Seeing her being so polite, the 2 disciples also looked amiable. They pointed inside and replied, "Junior Marshal Brother, just wait there. Senior Marshal Brother will come to greet you later." Mo Tienga looked in that direction. Sure enough, There were already several people there. She saluted them again and said, "Thank you, Senior Marshal Brothers." She then followed the directions and entered the monastery, obediently waiting in an empty spot. Second uncle told her not to offend any aura refining cultivators, not even those who fetched water and cooked. Although they had no ability, they were the most troublesome ones. Therefore, even if they were only 2 disciples guarding the gate, she still called them. Just as she was bored to death, someone walked up to her and said, "Junior Marshal Brother, how do you do?" Tinga turned her head and saw that this person was the only qualified 8th layer aura refining cultivator. This person was only in his 20s. He had an upright face, and his whole body was neat and tidy. He left a good impression on others. Marshal and Mo to Mo Marshal Uncle. That person smiled gently and elegantly. "Junior Marshal Brother, you're already in the 7th layer at such a young age, and your strength is outstanding. I'm afraid you'll surpass me soon. I'm Su Jingji. May I know your name?" Yi shouted on. Since this person was so polite, she naturally returned the favor. "What are you talking about, Senior Marshal Brother? I just ate a lot of medicinal pills to reach my current cultivation level. I was also lucky enough to win against several people, so I was selected. In terms of strength, Senior Marshal Brother is definitely stronger than me." Su Jingji smiled and waved his hand. He then said to her, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, we entered the sect together, so we'll probably be assigned to the same place to cultivate. Please take good care of us in the future." "Is that so?" Tinga didn't know how Yunwu sect arranged its new disciples, but she still replied, "That's true. We should take care of each other." The two of them chatted for a while. Soon, other people arrived one after another. Tinga discovered that the 10th layer aura refining middle-aged cultivator who lost to her the other day was also among them. Apparently, he won in another ring. However, his face was pale, and he was obviously injured. In addition, the youth she saw yesterday, who cast spells as fast as talismans, was also among them. When the hour of the dog approached, and the sun was setting in the west, 2 10th layer aura refining cultivators came from the direction of the main hall. They saluted everyone and said, "Junior Marshal Brothers and Sisters, please follow us to see the sect head." Everyone answered respectfully and followed the 2 people to the main hall. Upon entering the main hall, Tinga finally realized that this hall was tall and majestic. The interior of the hall was richly decorated and filled with spiritual aura. At the very top, there was a high chair on which a middle-aged man with a long beard was sitting and drinking tea. Tinga sensed that this person's spiritual aura was surging. He was undoubtedly the sect head's core formation grandmaster, Feng Dingwei. Sure enough, the 2 cultivators who led the 2 of them and stood on both sides of the hall and said, "Junior Marshal Brothers, quickly greet the sect head." Everyone hastily saluted. "Disciples greet the sect head." Feng Dingwei put down the tea set, stood up, and raised his hand. "You may rise." He swept his gaze over everyone and waited until everyone was standing respectfully before he said, "Since you've joined my Yunwu sect, you must abide by Yunwu sect's rules. The sect will also do its best to provide convenience for your cultivation. Since you stood out among thousands of people, it means you're all outstanding aura-refining cultivators. I hope you'll cultivate diligently, advance to the foundation-building realm, and carry forward my Yunwu sect. All right, it's getting late. You should go to the steward's hall to register your names and collect your items. Tomorrow, you'll cultivate together with my Yunwu sect's disciples." After a simple lecture, the 2 aura-refining cultivators led everyone out of the main hall, around several places, and into a courtyard. This courtyard was very simple. It didn't have the grandeur of the main hall at all. It looked just like an ordinary, secular courtyard. There was a table in the courtyard's main hall, and a foundation-building cultivator was sitting behind it, meditating. The 2 cultivators who led them into the hall respectfully said, "Marshal Uncle Yu, I've brought new disciples to register." The cultivator didn't answer and continued to cultivate. The 2 aura-refining cultivators weren't in a hurry and just waited. After a long time, the foundation-building cultivator finally opened his eyes. He faintly swept his gaze over them and said, "Hand over your identity tablets one by one to collect your items." The two of them answered yes. He then turned to them and said, "Junior Marshall brothers and sisters, come in one by one. After you've collected your items, wait in the courtyard for a while. We'll take you to your residences in a moment." Everyone hastily nodded and said yes. Soon after, they went in one by one, none of them daring to compete. Soon, it was Mo Tienga's turn to go in. The foundation-building cultivator checked her identity tablet and wrote her name on another jade slip. He then took out another jade slip and told her to leave her divine sense imprint on both the jade slip and the jade slip. After leaving the jade slip, he handed the jade slip to her. Soon after, he picked up a Chinquan bag out of nowhere and tossed it to her. Mo Tienga hastily caught it and saluted him before leaving. Soon, everyone finished registering and followed the two aura refining cultivators. This time, they walked for an unknown amount of time until they arrived at the back of the mountain. They took a detour and finally stopped at a mountain residence. This was also a courtyard, but it was different from the courtyard in the steward's hall. It was a bamboo house surrounded by a fence. Someone immediately came out. It was a middle-aged woman in the foundation-building realm. The two aura refining disciples hastily stepped forward and saluted her. "Greetings, Marshal Uncle Lin. We're here to escort several new junior Marshal sisters. We'll have to trouble Marshal Uncle to make arrangements for them." The woman frowned and said coldly, "Why didn't you escort the female disciples here alone? It's not appropriate for so many men to come to my female courtyard." The two of them repeatedly apologized. Yes. Disciples were reckless. "Marshal Uncle, please punish us." The woman snorted. "Forget it. Female disciples, follow me." The only 4 female disciples stepped forward and saluted her in unison. "Greetings, Marshal Uncle. That'll do. You can leave now." The woman led the female disciples into the courtyard, but she didn't pay any attention to the others. The two aura refining disciples smiled bitterly at each other. They then led everyone to another bamboo house. "This is your residence. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou is in charge of this place. However, he's out because he has something to do, so we'll take care of it first. Each of you will have a room, so 5 people will share a big house. I'll call your names so you can pick your own room." Soon, Mo Tingo was also assigned a room. She saluted, then went to the big house. Su Jingji was unexpectedly assigned to the same big house as her. For cultivators, tidying up a room was nothing more than a few minor spells. Therefore, after a while, the cultivators living in the same big house met in the small hall and got to know each other. In Mo Tinga's room, aside from Su Jingji, there were 3 other people. 2 of them were in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, and 1 was in the 9th layer of the aura refining realm. The 9th layer aura refining cultivator was called Qin Shi. He was the youth she saw yesterday, who cast spells that were comparable to talismans. He seemed to be in his early 20s. He had a handsome face, but he didn't seem to like talking much. Of the 2 10th layer aura refining cultivators, 1 was called Lu Yidao. He was a very forthright and strong man. The other was called Jiang Shanghong. He seemed to be less than 30 years old. His facial features were regular, but he looked gloomy and cold. He seemed to be a cultivator who practiced water spells. In this house, Mo Tienga was the youngest. Both her cultivation level and age were the lowest, so she straightforwardly took them as her junior and called them senior martial brothers. The oldest was naturally Louis Dao. He was already 32 years old, but he treated people warmly and had the demeanor of a boss, so he became her senior martial brother. Next was Jiang Shanghong, who was 28 years old. Su Jingji and Qin, she looked about the same age, but Qin, she said he was 24 years old, while Su Jingji said he was 23 years old. Therefore, Qin, she was the oldest. Louis Dao and Su Jingji were both the same age and cultivation level. Louis Dao and Su Jingji repeatedly exclaimed that it was a coincidence and said they wanted to drink a cup of wine. Unfortunately, everyone had just arrived at the sect and it was getting dark. There was nowhere to find wine, so they could only give up. Since they had just arrived, everyone needed to tidy up their things. Therefore, they only gathered for a short while before returning to their respective rooms to cultivate and adapt to the environment. Mo Tinga finally heaved a sigh of relief after she returned to her small room and laid a defensive formation. She then sat on the bed, feeling powerless all over. Although she had the spirit-concealing jade pendant, she was still very worried that her disguise would be seen through. Fortunately, the jade pendant was just as Yi Jingwen said. Even nascent soul cultivators couldn't see through her constitution, so it was much safer for her to disguise as a man. Originally, she thought it would be a bit more convenient to enter the sect as a woman, but second uncle said the women in the sect might have already been assigned dual cultivation candidates, so it would be better for her to continue to disguise as a man. In any case, she didn't need to live with other people, so there shouldn't be any harm in being a bit more careful. Now, although she had her own room in the sect, she would still be living with many men, so she had to be extremely careful in the future. Chapter 38. The room wasn't big. In the corner of the room, there was a low bed covered with a straw mat and a praying mat. There was also a wooden table and a chair. Apart from that, there was nothing else. However, this was a cultivation group after all. Both the straw mat and the wooden table had a faint spiritual aura. Obviously, they weren't secular things. Once she settled down, Mo Tinga took out all kinds of things from her chinko bag. For example, bedding. Although she didn't need to rest much now, having a quilt made her feel warmer. After everything was packed, she checked the things she brought back. This chinko bag was the most common kind in the cultivation world, far inferior to Mo Tinga's. After all, her chinko bag was Yi Clan's collection and wasn't a common item. There weren't many things inside. There was a jade tablet, a cultivation technique manual, 2 bottles of medicinal pills, 20 spirit stones, and a jade slip called Yunwu Sec's Handbook, which recorded the sect's rules and precautions. That jade tablet was an identity tablet. She saw Yi Jingwen use it many years ago. Cultivation groups often used it to prove their disciples' identities. The jade tablet was engraved with the name, age, cultivation level, and so on. At the same time, the sect kept a copy of it for verification if a missing disciple returned. Yunwu Sec's Aura Refining Realm Cultivation Technique Manual was distributed according to the 5 elements. For example, Mo Tinga was registered as cultivating a wood element cultivation technique during the Immortals Assembly, so this cultivation technique was of the wood element. However, this cultivation technique was called the Art of Longevity. It was the most common basic cultivation technique in the cultivation world. It was just a bit more complete than the one circulating in the outside world and also had some annotations from predecessors. There were also 20 spirit stones and 2 bottles of medicinal pills, which were the rewards of the Immortals Assembly. From now on, they would be distributed like ordinary disciples every month. Mo Tinga was very happy with these 2 bottles of medicinal pills. With her spiritual roots, a good cultivation technique, spirit gathering pearl, and spirit gathering formation, she could only guarantee that she wouldn't fall behind ordinary cultivators with 3 spiritual roots. If she wanted to stand out among them, medicinal pills were indispensable. Today, she didn't cultivate. Instead, she had a good sleep. When she woke up early in the morning, she was full of energy. When she left the room, the small hall was quiet. There were cultivators' breaths in the other rooms, so presumably they were all cultivating. She locked the door and went out to freshen up. It was written in the booklet that this bamboo house had a small stream flowing behind it. The sect drew the water from the stream to form a pool for the disciples to wash. Turning to the back of the house, there was indeed a pool. There was no one around at the moment, so she took a handkerchief to wash up. Of course, he would forget about combing his hair. He could go back to his room and do it slowly. After washing up, Zhang Xian was just about to return to his room when he bumped into 2 people who were chatting with each other. Mo Tinga immediately greeted them. "Good morning, senior martial brothers." When the 2 men saw her, they greeted her and chatted while looking for a place to wash their faces. In the next moment, Mo Tienga had the urge to vomit, because one of them unceremoniously took off his clothes and jumped into the water. Looking at his fat body and thinking about how disgusting it was for him to use this water to wash his face and mouth, he made up his mind that next time he would definitely go upstream to collect water. When they returned to the big house, Su Jingji was chatting with Qin Shi. Qin Shi's expression was very stiff. Obviously, he wasn't interested in the topic of their conversation. Upon seeing her, Su Jingji immediately called out happily, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you're so early." "Ah, good morning, Senior Marshal Brothers." Mo Tienga walked towards them and asked with a smile, "What are you two talking about?" Su Jingji said, "We were just talking about going to eat and taking a stroll around the school to understand a bit more." "Oh, I see." Although Su Jingji was overflowing with interest, Qin Shi, who was beside him, obviously wasn't interested. He just didn't refuse to give Su Jingji face. After all, cultivators didn't like to be involved in worldly affairs. Although they couldn't abstain from eating, they generally preferred to eat fasting pills. Mo Tienga thought for a moment, then said with a smile, "I'll go with you. I'm really a bit hungry." Su Jingji was very happy. At that moment, the door of another room opened. Lu Yidao came out and looked at them. "Junior Marshal Brothers, what are you talking about?" "Oh, Senior Marshal Brother Lu, we're talking about going to the dining hall to eat something and take a stroll." Lu Yidao pondered for a moment, then said, "You don't mind if I go with you, right?" Su Jingji waved his hand repeatedly. "Of course not. Senior Marshal Brother Lu can't wait to go." Lu Yidao laughed. "Since the four of us are going, we might as well call Junior Marshal Brother Jiang." Su Jingji naturally didn't have any objections. Mo Tienga also didn't care. It was naturally good for her to have a good relationship with the Senior Marshal Brothers who lived with her. Qin Shi still had a wooden expression on his face. No one knew what he was thinking. Lu Yidao knocked on Jiang Shanghong's door. "Junior Marshal Brother Jiang." A moment later, the door opened. Jiang Shanghong pulled the bolt and looked at Lu Yidao standing at the door. His tone was indifferent, but it still carried a hint of coldness. "Senior Marshal Brother Lu, what's the matter?" Lu Yidao said with a smile, "Junior Marshal Brother Jiang, we've decided to go to the dining hall to eat something and then take a stroll. Do you want to go together?" Jiang Shanghong frowned. "I'm not going." Lu Yidao was stunned. He didn't expect this person to be so cold, as if he didn't want to get close to them. He didn't insist and said with a smile, "Junior Marshal Brother Jiang, please help yourself. We'll be leaving first." Jiang Shanghong uttered an "in," then closed the door in Lu Yidao's face. Lu Yidao didn't mind. He turned around and called out to the others, "Let's go." Mo Tienga and Su Jingji glanced at each other, then shook their heads and followed Lu Yidao out. After walking for a short distance, Su Jingji secretly said to her, "This Senior Marshal Brother Jiang is also from a cultivation clan of Yunwu's sect. I heard he was abandoned by his clan and gave the opportunity to enter the sect to his cousin. He wasn't willing to accept this, so he was willing to risk his life to participate in the Immortals' assembly." Oh, Mo Tienga finally understood. Presumably, this person's heart was filled with ambition, so he simply didn't want to spend his time on anything other than cultivation. Junior Marshal Brother Jiang's cultivation level is already in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm before he's 30 years old. It's already very rare, but their clan actually gave up on such a disciple. Lu Yidao, who had heard their conversation, also came over. Su Jingji was also a member of a cultivation clan, so he knew a lot about this situation. He said, "Senior Marshal Brother Lu doesn't know, but their Jiang clan is also one of the best cultivation clans in Yunwu's sect. They have 2 core formation cultivators and dozens of foundation building cultivators. They don't care about disciples with 3 spiritual roots or below." This Senior Marshal Brother Jiang originally had an elder who, because of a power struggle within the clan, offended the current clan head. That elder has long passed away, so Senior Marshal Brother Jiang has to take his anger out on everyone. Aside from Su Jingji, everyone present was an individual cultivator. They couldn't imagine the power struggle within a cultivation clan, so they could only shake their heads. Louis Dao sighed and said, although this junior Marshall Brother Zhang's spiritual roots aren't too good, he's very hard-working in his cultivation. If he had the clan support, presumably, he would have been able to build his foundation. What a pity. Su Jingji also shook his head. According to their Jiang clan's power, they can recommend several disciples to enter the sect every year. In fact, if it was someone else, they wouldn't need to cultivate to the 10th layer to directly enter the sect. They basically wouldn't need to participate in the Immortals' assembly. Unlike our Su clan, which is only a small cultivation clan with very few quotas, we have no choice but to participate in the Immortals' assembly. Several people sighed inwardly. Being an individual cultivator wasn't easy, and cultivation clans weren't always smooth sailing either. Both had their own difficulties. In conclusion, there was only one reason. The path to immortality was difficult. Mount Yunwu had two peaks, the north and the south. Newcomers like them were all assigned to the south peak. The south peak was shorter, and the spirit chi there was also less. The mountain gate was directly connected to the market square, so it was very convenient for low-level disciples to stay here. The north peak, on the other hand, was a lot taller, and the spiritual aura there was also several times better. Apparently, only those who had built their foundation could move to the north peak. For aura-refining disciples like them, they couldn't go to the north peak without a task. On the southern peak, there was the True Treasure Hall, the Deacon's Hall, and the Tao Propagation Palace. The real treasure hall was where the sect leader handled matters. However, the sect leader was usually on the north peak, and the disciples on the south peak were all managed by the Deacon's Hall. The Deacon's Hall managed all the affairs of the aura-refining disciples, such as assigning tasks, distributing spirit stones and medicinal pills, arranging accommodation, handling disputes, and so on. The Tao Propagation Palace, on the other hand, was a place for preaching Tao. Every 10 days, a foundation-building cultivator would preach there, and occasionally, core formation cultivators would come. This was the most popular event for aura-refining disciples. As for the errands, they were usually done by the odd-job disciples. So-called part-time disciples were different from formal disciples like them. Every 10 years, when a mountain gate was opened to recruit disciples based on their spiritual roots, some people with poor spiritual roots who failed to be selected would volunteer to become part-time disciples. Their job was to handle some chores, such as guarding the gate, running errands, cleaning, and so on. The ones who served them in the dining hall were the part-time disciples. Like them, part-time disciples were also given spirit stones according to the tasks they did. However, they didn't get medicinal pills. If a foundation-building elder fancied a part-time disciple, he or she could be promoted to a formal disciple. So many people were willing to become part-time disciples. Of course, it didn't mean that formal disciples didn't have to do anything. For example, guarding the mountain gate required a formal disciple to lead them. Taking care of spiritual plants, concocting pills, and refining tools were all done by formal disciples and a few part-time disciples. However, compared to part-time disciples, formal disciples only needed to do 1 or 2 tasks every year, so they had a lot of time to cultivate. When they returned to their residence, they found an unfamiliar cultivator watering 2 spiritual plants next to the first room. When they were sent here yesterday, the 2 aura-refining disciples told them that the first room was where the manager lived. The manager of their residence was Senior Marshall Brother Zhou, but he wasn't here for the time being. When they saw this person, everyone's expression changed. This person's cultivation level was actually slightly higher than a 10th layer aura refining cultivator, but he hadn't reached the foundation building realm yet, so he seemed to be in the 11th layer. According to the classification of aura refining realms, the first to the 4th layer was the early stage of the aura refining realm, the 5th to the 7th layer was the middle stage, the 8th to the 10th layer was the late stage, and the 10th layer was the peak stage of the aura refining realm. However, there was one situation where a cultivator's cultivation level was higher than the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, but he wasn't in the foundation building realm. That was when a cultivator ate a foundation-building pill, but didn't succeed in building his foundation, but completely absorbed the medicinal power of the foundation-building pill, thus advancing to the 11th layer of the aura, refining realm. Normally, if one failed in building their foundation, their spiritual aura wouldn't increase. Once this happened, the cultivator would only need 2 foundation-building pills at most to successfully build their foundation. If an 11th layer aura refining cultivator took a foundation-building pill, they might be able to advance to the 12th layer, but if a 12th layer aura refining cultivator took a foundation-building pill, they would definitely advance to the foundation-building realm. As for ordinary disciples, the success rate of taking a foundation-building pill was no more than 10 to 20%. Therefore, whenever a disciple in the 11th layer of the aura refining realm appeared, the next foundation-building pill would definitely fall into their hands. In other words, they were almost all foundation-building cultivators. Apparently, this person was their supervisor, Senior Marshal Brother Zhou. It was no wonder that the supervisor of the female courtyard was a foundation-building martial uncle, but they were actually his senior martial brother. It turned out that this senior martial brother wasn't an ordinary disciple. While they were still in shock, Senior Martial Brother Zhou had already finished watering the spiritual plants. He turned around and swept a glance at them. While putting away the watering tools, he said, "You're the new disciples?" They regained their senses and hastily saluted him. "Greetings, Senior Martial Brother Zhou." Senior Martial Brother Zhou uttered an "eh," then went back to trimming the leaves. He said, "Since you're living here, you have to abide by my rules. I don't care whether you cultivate or play around, but you're not allowed to disturb other people, you're not allowed to go to places you're not allowed to go, and you're not allowed to fight. If you need to leave the mountain, you need to inform me. If you have a dispute with someone else, you also need to report to me. Of course, if you encounter any problems in your cultivation, you can also come to me. Understood?" They all answered in unison, "Yes." Senior Martial Brother Zhou waved his hand. "That's enough. You can go now." They saluted him again before returning to their small living room. Once they closed the door, Su Jingji immediately said enviously, "So this is the 11th layer of the aura, refining realm. This Senior Martial Brother Zhou's luck is really good. How could Imo Tinga not think so? With her spiritual roots, the possibility of her building her foundation was really very small. Although the 11th layer of the aura refining realm wasn't the foundation building realm, it was tantamount to having 1 foot in the door of the foundation building realm." Lu Yidao said, "Among us who entered the sect, which one of us didn't come for the foundation building pills? I just don't know if we'll be as lucky as Senior Martial Brother Zhou. If we can enter the 11th layer of the aura refining realm, then we'll have hope in building our foundation." Qin, she said, "I heard there's still 3 years until the sect's internal competition. Work hard." The 3 of them nodded repeatedly. The internal competition would award foundation-building pills according to the ranking, so they naturally wouldn't let this opportunity slip by. However, Imo Tiango was very worried. Lu Yidao was in the 10th layer, so in the next 3 years, he only needed to practice fighting. Qin, she was in the 9th layer, so he had a high chance of entering the 10th layer. He was also good at fights of magical powers. As for Su Jingji, his cultivation level was a bit higher than hers, and he also had the backing of his clan. Only she, who was in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm, could enter the sect through luck. Being able to reach the 9th layer of the aura refining realm within 3 years was already very ideal. Wanting to win a foundation-building pill was too difficult. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.